Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you're watching second and final part of What If Naruto Awaken Animus Bloodline after Sasuke Retrieval arc. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
With 3 other ships joining it in its attack run, the Blue Sea maneuvered with ease. The other 3 were much slower but made every effort to stay up. Knowing that he had to outrun this impending storm, Cyrus shouted out his orders, "All ahead full, get us within firing range," as the mortars finally started raining down again in an attempt to close the distance, with the 4 ships narrowly avoiding them in the process. The other ships were fortunate to have survived the assault with only minor damage because of the shields, but the extra speed was all that kept them safe. The Blue Sea approached steadily in an attempt to get closer so she could fire both her main battery and long-range weapons. "We are within weapons range for the mortars, sir," yelled one of the crew members. "Don't fire yet." Surprised, he yelled, "But sir?" "Fire the mortars now, aim for the superstructure and their launchers," Cyrus yelled after closely monitoring the distance. As the mortars came alive and began firing heavy explosive rounds at the super dreadnought, the crew yelled, "Yes sir." The crew was shocked to see that only one set of launchers was disabled from their point of view as they observed the damage they had caused, but the rounds did hit true as explosions were seen coming from the large dreadnought's bow. Cyrus swiftly gave the order to turn the ship hard starboard and fire the port cannons at the dreadnought. As the cannons roared to life on the ship's port side, their shots struck the dreadnought's hull with only minor damage, but enough to startle its crew with cries of pain and screams. Cyrus saw the damage and realized that they could harm the ship, but the issue was its size and the fact that the former had blocked some of their shots. He also saw a portion of their enemy's attack plan, and he immediately felt both hopeful and concerned, but he still needed one more piece to complete his theory. He promptly ordered his ships to retreat to the safety of the remaining fleet after the Blue Sea swiftly fired shots from its port side to cover the retreat of one of the fleet that needed protection due to the battle damage it had just received. "I want a plot point on their position as well as their fleet, and I need to know where they were before the attack and where they are now," Cyrus said gravely to one of his crew members after the dreadnought and its 4 escort ships unexpectedly withdrew as well. The young crewman was taken aback by what he was being instructed to do, but it only took him a moment to figure everything out and promptly presented the outcome of his efforts to the captain. The young man said, "Here's your report, sir, but it doesn't make any sense to me?" His daughter saw the expression on his face and knew something was amiss, so Cyrus accepted the report right away and thanked him for having his worst fears validated. "What is it?" As he instructed the communications to be opened with the fort, he handed her the reports, saying, "It's a classic tactic with the dreadnought, they send ships forward at a wave with the dreadnought included." A female voice asked over the radio, "Why?" "To inflict as much damage on the enemy as they can. They then send first 4 ships to back the fleet for repairs and 4 fresh ones up front to take their place in the formation. Then the attack began and again repeating the same scenario. The only constant is the dreadnought. But unfortunately they are pulling us further and further out sea and away from the fort." Upon realizing their plan, the voice on the radio could only be heard gasping, "If they do that we can't support you at all. They can pick you all off one at a time." "Yes. And then they attacked the fort with all their remaining numbers. The only advantage that we have is that this takes time to do. So we used the tactic against them and buy enough time for Naruto to get here," his daughter asked, echoing his conclusion. "That's right," he said, nodding his head at his daughter, "so we will change our tactical a little bit as well." One of his crewmen said, "Where your order, sir? Tell the fleet to send 4 fast attack ships with the best weapons we have at our disposal to the front of the fleet for immediate deployment when the next wave happens." The young man questioned, "Will that be enough, sir?" Cyrus looked at the young man and replied, "For the moment it will. They are to attack the escort ships and inflict as much damage as they can. As for us, we are going to inflict as much damage as we can on the dreadnought." Land of Fire, Hidden Leaf Village, Secret Route Headquarters. As he watched his medical team treat the 5 unconscious Uchiha clan women who had surreptitiously survived that night so long ago, Danzo was extremely worried. He found it difficult to accept that they had survived at all, even as he watched the team perform physical therapy to keep them strong and healthy and to stop the development of atrophied muscles. One of the women was the mother of the young apprentice assassin. If Itachi hadn't acted quickly after discovering them all, they would all have died. Danzo had feelings, despite what many people may believe. He simply learned to suppress them and turn them off when necessary. Right now, though, he was having a lot of trouble regaining control because of everything that had happened recently. A young woman who was the head of the medical staff approached him and bowed slightly before she began to say, "Their conditions have improved a little bit, my lord, but I'm afraid we just don't have the medical experience or the equipment to bring them out of their conditions." "You suggest we bring Tsunade into our little circle?" she replied. "At the moment, sir, it's all we really can do. It was not for Lord Third and you, they would be dead right now." "So we have confirmed the intrusion into the hospital did occur, and I take it they were looking for them?" he inquired. After nodding her head, she said gravely, "We should eliminate them now, they're becoming too dangerous." He raised his eyebrows in agreement. "We may have to move sooner than expected, and you are right, Lady Tsunade may be their only hope. The only problem is getting her here secretly and quietly without tipping our hand to the enemy." The woman in front of him now had a Freemason symbol around her neck, saying, "You will find a way, my lord, that is what your old friend always liked about you." As he glanced at a clock, he gave her one of his few sincere smiles and said, "I got one of those feelings again. The turning point has begun and I know that young Uzumaki is in the center of it." Point 11. 37 Land of Spring, Long Ice Bay. Knowing that his ships would not be able to survive this type of combat for very long, Cyrus watched with great concern as the enemy ships moved into a new attack position. But now he only needed to buy time, and when he looked at his pocket watch, he could feel the years catching up to him and realized that he needed to make a tactical choice immediately. As he went to deliver the orders, the young officer nodded his head and said, "Inform the other 4 ships that they are only to attack the 4 cruisers and not the dreadnought." "Are we really going to do this?" his daughter Sordiara asked, peering through her binoculars with a hint of trepidation at the impending battle. The crew immediately sprang into action, getting every gun on board ready for action. "Afraid so, Princess. All hands prepare for battle once more." While the other 4 ships stayed on course and were widely spaced, preventing the enemy from having enough room to maneuver in an emergency, Cyrus watched as the ship advanced on its suicidal collision course with the enemy. The ships were forced to take extreme precautions to avoid being struck by the dreadnought's mortars, but in a matter of seconds, they had reclaimed their previous positions and were advancing on their designated targets. With the dreadnought letting their own mortars fly, the Blue Sea, the fleet's fastest, rapidly closed the gap. The mortars struck their targets in a matter of seconds, followed by the sounds of metal groaning and a few men who screamed out before being silenced. Even though the dreadnought was now heavily armored up to the hatch covers, the Blue Sea made a sharp turn to starboard, bringing its port side guns to bear and firing a broadside at the main battery area. Nevertheless, some of the rounds did manage to get through the hull plating and cover. Even though the enemy was heavily armored, the rounds exploded internally, indicating a successful attack, and the sounds of screaming could be heard. Unfortunately, it was evident that the water fleet had suffered significantly less damage in this encounter as the ship continued its turn and saw that both sides had dealt each other a good deal of damage as the Spring fleet withdrew after finishing their attack run. They reloaded the guns, and Cyrus was told to fire the gun on those 2 waterships as we pass by. As soon as the Spring fleet returned to its own staging area, the gun crews immediately aimed and fired at the 2 retreating ships, causing massive damage as the rounds struck them. It was obvious that the ships in question would not be in top fighting form anytime soon. 1143 Reliant Water Flagship. Admiral Julian Kahn decided to act right away after he could not shake the feeling that something was about to happen as he observed the retreating Spring fleet through his spyglass. "Father, why are we dragging this out?" his son asked as he stood by his side at this precise moment. He grinned cruelly as he thought of the ways he would subjugate the Lady Daimyo before destroying her. "They test me, son, they test me, and I shall destroy them for this indignity. I will chase them from the land of fire to the rocks of perdition before I give them up. Inform the next wave to move faster than expected. I want them to bleed before I finish them off," he said, turning to one of his officers after giving his son the spyglass. Knowing exactly what was going to happen, the young officer nodded his head as he proceeded to the communication officer to relay the orders. Point 11. 46 Fleet Spring. Cyrus cursed as he peered through his spyglass, saying, "Son of a bitch, he's not waiting as long. Prepare the next wave immediately." As she approached her father, Sordiara felt a little anxious. "But father, they're still not ready yet?" she asked. With concern and a sudden resolve, he gazed out at the approaching wave of enemy ships and said, Tell our ships to move on my mark and not a second before. Cyrus watched the enemy fleet approach and started calculating the distance of the dreadnought's mortars to determine their true power. She nodded her head as she went to relay the orders and wait for the impending battle. He assessed the distance in an attempt to identify a weak spot, but for the time being he had to take action or risk the fleet's demise. He then yelled his orders to move forward, fully aware that they needed to buy as much time as possible. The two fleets were fighting fiercely against one another once more, with shot after shot coming from both sides and the sounds of people yelling for assistance and mercy as the blows hit home. Their luck of avoiding damage ended at this point in the battle when a barrage from the dreadnought struck their port side as they made a sharp turn to starboard. The Blue Sea was a flurry of activity as every weapon was fired in an attempt to do as much damage as they could in the hopes of a lucky hit. The command crew, who had swiftly ducked to avoid the flying debris, suffered only minor cuts and bruises from the blow, which was near the bridge area and sent shrapnel pieces directly at them. However, the crew members who had been at the epicenter of the damage suffered the worst. When Cyrus saw one of the enemy ships approaching, he immediately ordered a full broadside, saying, "Fire on the approaching ship, give them everything you've got. Keep the guns spitting, boys." Cyrus then looked down upon the deck and yelled for a medic to tend to the wounded. The sound of men yelling for assistance could be heard as the ship was literally blown in two after the main powder magazine was struck, causing a chain reaction. The crew members who were unharmed immediately took up positions and started firing again at the approaching cruiser, sending shot after shot into the ship's superstructure and below its waterline. Knowing that the enemy fleet would be doing everything in their power to try to save the crew members of the wounded and dying ship, Cyrus wasted no time in ordering the fleet back to their own lines. Point 11. 48 Water Fleet, dependable since one of his ships was literally destroyed and now sinking in the waters of the Land of Spring. Admiral Julian Khan was unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. Knowing that rescue and salvage efforts would take a considerable amount of time, he was forced to halt the attack. "How can this be, father? They haven't even lost a single ship yet," his son asked, shocked by the sight and unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. "That ship is what is giving them the edge, my son, and we are going to take it from them," his father said, assessing the Blue Sea thoroughly before devising a new plan for the next assault. "Once we've recovered everyone, we can tell the ships to begin minimum repairs. But when I give my orders for them to attack, I want everything they have directed at those ships, especially that one." Even though he was finding it more and more difficult to control this weapon and its incredible power, Khan recalled how that one night with that red-headed bitch and her weapon of a son had derailed so many of their plans and left him with a simple scar on his left cheek as a reminder. His son nodded and proceeded to carry out the orders as Khan looked at the pitiful spring fleet and then touched his greatest prize, which now hung at his side. The trophy of the man he had once called a friend but who had ultimately betrayed him. Point 11. 51 Spring Fleet, Blue Sea. One of his officers approached Cyrus as he looked over the damage to his ship and said, "5 casualties, no fatalities, thank you God. The damage to the hull is light but the shields in that area are now down to 65%. Cyrus could only sigh in frustration. After giving a nod, Cyrus said, "What about the other ships?" "They're functionally and only took minor damage, sir, but we really need help. After losing that ship I don't think they're going to go easy on us anymore." Looking out at the enemy fleet, Cyrus said, "I have a feeling you're right about that one." He could only silently pray that the child would come soon. The sound of his daughter running up to him said, "Dad, the proximity seal just went off, the Vixen's about 8 minutes away and closing." It seemed as though his prayers had been answered. "The good news is that we have at least 3 minutes until they're done with their rescue and salvage operations over there and decided to come and pay us a visit," Cyrus said, turning back to the enemy fleet and examining them closely. "That still leaves us another 5 minutes to kill before they arrived. Can we honestly last that long?" asked one of his crew members, nodding his head in agreement with the plan. "We have to, gentlemen. I believe they are going to commit everything they have to the next attack. They weren't expecting to lose one of their ships so soon and for the dreadnought to take so much damage." Cyrus wished for a further miracle to take place. A member of his crew subsequently chose to offer his view. "We do need to be careful, sir. They may have lost one ship to combat but all of our own have taken more damage. However, I believe that they are still trying to figure out why we are not on the bottom already. Prepare the ship for immediate combat and fix whatever you can. Relay that order to the entire fleet. Let's end this," he said, turning to the crew and speaking in a commanding tone. 1152 Long Ice Bay's Frozen Queen. When Morgan and her crew noticed the enormous enemy fleet closing in on the bay, she snarled and immediately ordered, "Prepare the guns for immediate combat." She knew that battle had arrived. They all hurried to their combat stations, and one of them yelled, "Yes, Captain." After experiencing a powerful sensation that she had never experienced before, Morgan turned to face the ship's stern and saw another ship rapidly approaching. Another member of her crew also saw the ship, and despite its somewhat menacing appearance, they couldn't help but feel hopeful. "Do you think we should be concerned about the ship?" asked one of her crew members, expressing his worries. As the ship readied itself for battle, the crew member nodded and said, "No, stay on course." Black Vixen at 1153. When Naruto peered through his spyglass at the ship, which appeared to have parts made of snow and ice, he realized right away that it was heading in to fight the water fleet rather than the spring fleet. "I've never seen a ship like that before," Karen said, standing beside her cousin with a hint of trepidation at what was about to happen. She gave him a worried look, and he responded, "Neither have I, but I get the feeling we can trust that ship and its captain, but there's something else nagging at the back of my mind." "Is this nudging something we have to be afraid of?" she inquired. Knowing how unique it was now, he said to her, lightly touching the blade on his back, "I'm not sure, but I felt something like before when I found the maelstrom." Knowing that they would not be able to reach the fleet before the next attack, she nodded her head and turned around. She then watched her cousin put the spyglass away before turning to the numerous crew members to give orders. As the ship prepared for battle, everyone nodded their heads in agreement. "Battle stations, load all the guns and prepare for combat." Knowing that this was going to be the real thing, the gun crews started loading the guns as soon as possible. The main gun deck was a flurry of activity as metal grates were lifted up and out of place to reveal a heavy artillery round delivery system to each of the side batteries. Swords and other equipment were distributed to men and women at the main armory, along with personal weapons like long-range guns and multiple grenades. Similar procedures were being followed on the main deck, where additional weapons were prepared for battle and loaded guns were also present. The crew below decks at the waterline were securing all cabins in case of damage or flooding, and the RGs were also being loaded and prepared for battle. As the various stations reported in, port side armed and loaded, the bridge communication station came to life. Starboard side armed and loaded, stern guns armed and loaded, bow guns armed and loaded. The final report came in with a slight smile on his face. Main deck armed and loaded. As if it owned the sea itself, a rather large eagle soared over the ship as it navigated the water. At this precise moment, a strange black cloud engulfed the entire ship, with red lightning sparking here and there. The Black Fox's personal flag, which was now flying at the top of the mast in all its splendor as it blended into the darkness, was the last object to be hidden by the cloud. Point 11. 55 Blue Sea, Spring Fleet. When Cyrus realized that the enemy fleet had finished their operations and was rapidly approaching their position, he wasted no time in ordering an attack. He told his communications officer, "Tell the fleet to engage any ship they can but not the dreadnought," and she replied that the message had been sent. Without saying a word, the Spring Fleet closed in and began firing on any ship they could get a lock on. In the first minute of the battle, many ships were on fire, and men could be heard screaming as the ships continued to limp, but this did not stop them from firing back to torture their own tormentors. Although the Spring ships suffered less damage from their shields during this battle, the dreadnought, which had chosen to display its full weaponry, was also responsible for a large portion of the damage. The Traveler, which Naruto had taken control of following the Wave Country incident, was actually one of the first ships lost in the Spring Fleet. Nevertheless, the ship's death was not in vain because it served as a temporary shield for another damaged ship. Before it sank beneath the waves, the small ship had even managed to fire a few shots that caused its tormentor some unexpected damage. The ship and its rescued companion would soon follow, but not without a fight. The ship literally exploded and split into two pieces as it sank beneath the waves after misfiring one more salvo from its main guns that struck a fortunate spot. Knowing that he needed a miracle at the moment, Cyrus tried to control the fight as best he could, hoping that the Vixen would show up sooner to level the playing field. He had to set these thoughts aside when he ordered a hard turn to starboard in order to avoid being struck by a barrage of fire. He then heard more gunfire and turned to see a ship he had never seen before swiftly destroying a number of watercraft. Now that she knew it wasn't the Vixen, Sortiara was completely perplexed. Who the hell is that? Whoever they are on our side, and I think the kid is also on the way. Look, her father said, his expression mildly curious. Then, unable to believe what she was seeing, she turned to face her father and asked, "What the? He'll be here soon, princess. All we need to do is hold on." Frozen Queen, 1157. Knowing that time was of the essence, Morgan ordered the Frozen Queen to open fire as soon as she could. A couple of ships that dared to oppose them were quickly destroyed by the Frozen Queen's formidable weaponry. She smiled icily as she watched the ships glide under the water, but then she was flung to her side on the command deck, where she saw a sight she hoped she would never see again. For everyone to hear, one crew member yelled, "It's Admiral Khan." She saw the fear on everyone's faces right away, but she quickly regained control and gave the order for all of her ship's weapons to fire at the man who had betrayed them so severely that day. The chief engineer cursed the main engine, saying, "No, no, 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 come on, you piece of shit work." The admiral then fired a full broadside on them, severely damaging some of the repairs they had made below decks. Unfortunately, it only caused minor damage. As soon as she realized the engines were not making noise, she hurried to the engine room's communications and yelled, "We need engines back online now. Keep your panties on, all right, I'm working on it, just give me 2 minutes, was the poor response she received. She said into the receiver, "We don't have 2 minutes, then she heard someone tapping on her shoulder. When she looked up, she saw a member of her crew repeatedly tapping her shoulder while pointing out to sea while wearing a shocked and terrified expression. Then, as she turned to face the dreadnought, she saw nothing but a black cloud moving toward them, sending a chill down her spine. What the hell? 1158 Dependable. The admiral felt a great sense of resentment as he closed in for the kill and noticed an odd black cloud approaching the dreadnought. He could not believe both his good fortune and the fact that they had dared to defy him by surviving his meticulously planned plans to wipe out the water-resistance navy. Then, as dark as night itself, a black ship emerged from the cloud. He saw the ship coming toward the dreadnought and was filled with dread and a sense that something was amiss from his current prisoner. But before I looked into that young boy's eyes as he held his dying mother, he was also experiencing a sense of dread and fear for the first time in a long time. 1158 Vixen Black. Knowing full well that he would need to have the starboard battery ready to go at any time, Naruto steered the Vixen to the left. Then, spotting a rather large cruiser approaching, he acted swiftly, saying, "Drop the port anchor." Even though they were perplexed by his strategy, they followed his instructions and watched the anchor and chain disappear into the ocean. His cousin was a little uneasy about this odd plan as he watched the dreadnought zero in on their location in a matter of seconds. "I hope you know what you are doing, because if you don't we are all going to die. Everyone dies, I'm going to die, and you are going to die," he said, looking her in the eyes. When she noticed that the anchor chain was still dangling from the ship and into the ocean, she did not appear reassured. She then turned to face her cousin, who had a confident expression she had never seen before. Then he uttered 3 simple words, "Just not today." At that moment, the anchor chain tightened, causing the ship's bow to plunge deeper into the water. The anchor and chain struck a solid bottom, halting the ship's forward momentum. Naruto swiftly released the ship's wheel, causing it to spin wildly, while the fast attack battle cruiser maneuvered sideways, narrowly avoiding the massive barrage of incoming rounds fired by the dreadnought. When Naruto heard Raven say, "Let's drop some lead on those, mother," over the radio, he was able to see the astonished look on the dreadnought's captain's face thanks to his eagle vision. "Set aflame." As the main batteries and RGs thundered out for everyone to hear, he yelled over the radio. When the rounds connected, the admiral and the crew of the dreadnought assumed nothing bad would happen. However, they were shocked to see that the massive warship was literally being torn apart with each impact. The main battery then opened fire on the dreadnought, causing more damage than they had anticipated. Then, grinning, Naruto issued more commands. "Reload immediately and release the port anchor." The ship started to move forward again as soon as the sounds of the anchor being cut away were heard, but then it saw the dreadnought launch all of its mortar batteries at them, saying, "Incoming, incoming." In addition to silently praying that the shields would hold, the crew members on the main deck raised the anti-aircraft guns and started firing at the projectiles in the hopes of eliminating some of them. Despite the barrage of gunfire that erupted into the air, Roughly 4 rounds were able to strike the ship and shields. The explosions were so powerful that they knocked many men and women off their feet throughout the ship and produced a dense black smoke cloud that gave the impression that the ship was on fire. As the ship got closer to defeating this new, superior foe, the admiral could only smile, but that optimism was fleeting. As one man yelled, "Is everyone all right?" For everyone to hear, many people in the Vixen's engineering room were now standing up again with a determined expression on their faces. As he stood at his station, admiring the work he and the Wreckers had done so many years ago, one of the older men who had taught the engineering team everything they knew retorted, "They aren't going to sink this battlecruiser, no way." The admiral, the captain of the dreadnought, started to feel frightened as soon as the smoke started to clear, and Naruto heard that the guns had been reloaded in record time. He yelled, "Hit it," for everyone to hear. The words, "My God," that the captain of the dreadnought uttered as he had to literally duck down to avoid machine gunfire that was tearing his command center apart piece by piece, essentially summed up his thoughts as he watched his ship torn apart when the Vixen suddenly unleashed her second barrage and started to tear it to shreds. In contrast, the admiral saw 2 ships approach the port side of the Vixen and were fired upon. One ship was blown apart by a main gun salvo, and the other was torn apart by the main cannon battery. Morgan couldn't help but exclaim, "Holy shit," as she and a large portion of the Spring Fleet watched the powerful dreadnought literally be reduced to miniature while explosions were being torn from side to side of the ship. As the radio came to life, one of her crew members turned to face her and asked, "The emergency engine is online and I got the main engine working at half strength." With a determined expression on her face, she yelled commands rapidly, "Get in behind the admiral and stay there." One of them said to her, "Sir, are you insane?" "Not at all, he's going to attempt to attack that ship and we are not going to let him." As the dreadnought attacked, Naruto saw his crew fire round after round into it, causing massive damage. Despite all of this damage, the ship was still not sinking. Karen exclaimed, "Oh come on, sink you son of a bitch," in shock at what she was witnessing. After being told to fire the torpedoes, the starboard side torpedoes rose from their protective housing and launched their 2 fish into the water. One of the young crew members was running through the area next to the ship's enormous ammunition locker when he noticed flames starting to kiss the ammunition and arms. The torpedoes struck home in just 2 seconds, shattering the ship's structural spine and causing massive internal explosions. He knew his fate was set, and he exclaimed, "Son of a bitch," as everyone else started to flee in the opposite direction. Watching the massive warship literally leap out of the water at least 20 feet into the air and bend at an odd angle in the middle of the ship before exploding and splitting the ship in 2 was a sight to behold. The upper decks of the dreadnought, which were filled with nothing but fire and damaged metal hanging from all angles, were a sight to behold. The admiral saw the Vixen closing in on them, but he was shocked to see his fleet's trump card being literally destroyed in front of his eyes as many men were now jumping off the sinking ship that had once terrorized the ocean. Now that Naruto had a firm hold on the wheel, he set the Black Vixen on a collision course with the admiral's ship, knowing that one suicidal encounter could put an end to this battle forever. However, as he looked at the ship and its captain using his eagle vision, his eyes widened as he realized who was on that ship and why he had those special feelings, one related to his stolen past and the other to his unusually high level of rage. The admiral was about to yell for his weapons fire when he was struck from behind, fully destroying his engines and rudder with a single salvo from the Frozen Queen. Rage, on the other hand, was something he could control because he had a job to do. The admiral then acted swiftly and yelled for everyone to prepare for impact as he watched in horror as both ships maneuvered to ram his vessel at each side. The crew was prepared for battle and ready for anyone to board, even though both ships crashed into the Reliant right away, shattering her back and causing severe internal damage. "Do everything in your power to cut as many of them down as you can, but leave the captain for me," Naruto said as he stepped off the bridge, signaling everyone to get ready as they boarded the enemy ship. As he shot himself up into the rigging with the quick release and started to find his way to the enemy ship's captain, the crew nodded sympathetically. When Naruto saw how many of his sailors were now showing up on deck, he swiftly removed 2 of his berserker bombs and threw them into the crowd of people. Naruto moved through the rigging as if he were a part of it. Many members of the crew were engulfed in deadly smoke as soon as the bombs struck, and many of them were sent into a blind rage, killing many of their fellow crew members as if they were ordinary nighttime murderers. Morgan essentially issued the same commands, but she then drew her white as snow sword and used the rather special powers that only a mariner lord like her could have. Her hands now appear to be made of pure ice, and they are as sharp as steel. She also has wings made of pure ice, which radiate light through them. She then spread her wings and took to the air in search of the man who had caused so much harm and torture to people she had known. She spotted him on the main bridge deck with a number of other men, and she pounced like a deadly cat, killing 2 of them in the process, leaving only the admiral and 3 other men. With a sick smile on his face, the admiral himself drew the sword from its scabbard, turned to face her, and said, "You sick son of a bitch, he was your friend." However, the admiral simply met her eyes before swinging the sword and inflicting a wave of fire that damaged one of her wings, making it impossible for her to fly. Although the wing would eventually heal itself, she now had to contend with opponents, including 2 of them who were now advancing on her. She moves with deadly efficiency despite having one of her ice wings damaged, taking down the other 2 officers as if they were nothing and then blocking the admiral as he launched his attack. Unfortunately, he was still far more skilled with a sword than she had ever been, and he eventually disarmed her weapon and kicked her so hard that she flew across the deck and struck the bridge's back wall with such force that she nearly passed out. After eyeing her sword, the admiral was taken aback when she swiftly brought it back to her and caught it in her left hand. He simply shook his head in shock and started to move toward her, saying, "I merely used you all and that is all. After all, I am better than all of you." They both watched as a strange spear-like object embedded itself in the Adma's son, jerking him into the air after she said defiantly, "No, you're just another asshole who needs to die." The admiral cut the rope with a single, swift motion of his hand, sending his son back to the deck as he rushed to, "My son." His final words on this mortal coil were, "Father, yours is superior," as he smiled into his father's eyes. "I will avenge you," the admiral muttered for everyone to hear as he swiftly held his son to his chest. "You don't have the right, Captain." When the admiral turned around, he saw a young man dressed entirely in black standing in front of him with a hood over most of his face. The young man did not move, but instead gazed at the sword the admiral was holding and the young man in his arms. The young man said, "He died in battle, Captain. Isn't that what you always wanted? I will destroy you, boy, but before that I will make you understand who it is who has beaten you," the admiral said, rising to his full height and brandishing the strange sword, ready to be used upon the stranger in front of him. But in response, the young man chuckled slightly and said, "Well, you haven't changed much, Captain, but you've underestimated me once again." Astonished by this response, Khan wondered why the young man was referring to him as Captain. "I am the admiral of this fleet, boy. You will show the proper respect to him before you die." However, the young man used one hand to remove the sword from his back and the other to pull down his hood, exposing a head of spiky blonde hair, blue eyes that seemed to be pierced by red, and what looked like whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. But now, as he looked up at a face he hoped he would never see again in his life, the admiral had a practical heart attack and exclaimed, It is you." Unable to contain his laughter, Naruto said, "The ghost of Christmas past," before putting his hood back on and looking the admiral in the eyes. Morgan watched the battle with interest as the admiral and the fox attacked and blocked as if it were nothing, as they swiftly engaged in combat to determine who was the best in this life or death situation. "Your mother was so easy to kill, you know that. You could live for another lifetime still not defeat me. I am better than you at everything," the admiral felt compelled to say in an attempt to manipulate the boy's emotions and make them sloppy. Naturally, the admiral was unaware that he had actually lived more than one lifetime because of his ancestors. By applying all of the abilities he had learned to the bleeding effect and his rigorous training over the past few days with his uncle, he soon demonstrated that he was more than capable of defeating the admiral. He even succeeded in obtaining the odd sword with the fire symbol on it. The admiral continued to hold the sword in a death grip, but he began to experience an odd feeling throughout his body. They both believed they heard the sword and the soul attached to it saying, "Free us. Finish him," blasted out another voice from the sword. After glancing at the blade, Naruto turned to face the admiral. He remarked, "And my village called me a monster. You have enslaved a soul and a sentient weapon against their wills that have not chosen you, Captain. They have risen up against you. Free them," Khan said, his face defiant despite the pain he was now experiencing. Even though the admiral was in pain, he addressed Naruto directly and said, "I am superior to you all. and this sword and soul are mine. Forever," in a somber tone. Without wasting any time, Naruto headbutted the admiral and managed to cut off the arm holding the sword in one swift motion. With the sword out of his grasp, he looked down to discover that the seal that gave him control over and the ability to wield it was seriously damaged. "Please do something, help me. If the seal is not repaired, I will die. I will give you anything you want," he said, looking up into the young man's eyes and begging for some hope to save him. When Naruto raised the sword to show that his severed limb was reducing to ash and slipping away from the blade's handle, he said, "There is only one thing I want from you. Name it. Give me back my mother." Realizing that nothing could save him today, the admiral now wore a terrified, slightly defiant expression, saying, "No boy, the game's not over yet. They will hunt you down and destroy you." Nevertheless, Naruto regarded him icily as he said, "I long ago learned to do what is necessary to protect those precious to me, and because of that I don't have to kill you and ruin my soul. But at the same time I don't have to save you either." At the same time, the admiral wanted to say, "From hell's heart I stab at thee, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. Besides, I'm just an assassin. It's my job to kill people like you and it's God's job to forgive you. But like I said, I'm just an assassin, so I don't have to. May you be judged for all the darkness you have done in this world fairly, and find peace among the dead," Morgan said, listening to their conversation while waiting for her wing to reform. As the admiral was literally consumed by the phoenix's blade's fire, she watched. The first transformation that only the Mariner Lord blades could produce was the one that was used by the renegade member of the Seven Swords now serving the Red Clouds in their quest to punish those who had already been sacrificed. Naruto and Morgan felt a powerful force wash over him as he started this transformation. The main deck of the Reliant was a flurry of activity as the water crew fiercely retaliated against their boarders. It appeared as though the water crew would prevail until a stranger with an incredibly menacing appearance started slicing through the crowd, killing numerous water crew members and tearing them to pieces. Everyone was taken aback when they saw what appeared to be a walking skeleton dressed in clothing with what appeared to be blue wind surrounding it. The strange figure then launched an attack, using two powerful swords to cut down the water crew members as if they were nothing. The wind abruptly turned into a blue-green liquid that encircled the skeleton, which was the skin of this weird creature. It could shoot out water tentacles that could both pierce and grab people, tossing them from the ship as if it were nothing. The most horrifying part of this was yet to come, as it swiftly seized one of the top-ranking officers still on board and held him in the air as the final form took place. The next part appeared to be a dark purple, like lightning, encircling the skeleton. It then started attacking the enemy with lightning attacks, killing many of them in the process. Now that the skeleton was encircled by what appeared to be red-hot ash and smoke from a volcanic eruption, three tails that resembled the previous elemental shift were starting to form behind the figure 9. "Who and what the hell are you?" the man asked as the strange creature saw the blood-red Templar Order jewelry hanging from his neck and met his eyes. If his normal flash had been on, Naruto would have been grinning. He recalled a song he had heard as a child and the ending of the unique home, which was sung by a man whose voice was capable of sending shivers down people's spines. Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize y'all's neighborhood. He looked up to see Morgan flying through the air, waiting for an opportunity to pounce, and he continued to say, "And whoever shall be found without the soul for compassion, must stand and face the hounds of hell and rot inside a corpse's shell." Almost everyone was in shock at what they were seeing, and the level of fear in their chest only increased as he looked up. Even Morgan had to acknowledge that she was a little scared of this young man and the obvious power he possessed. He went on to say, "The foulest stench is in the air, the funk of 40,000 years, and grisly ghouls that you have created from every tomb are closing in to seal your doom." But the man he was holding was doing everything he could to get away as the fear in his chest threatened to stop his heart in its tracks. Many of the water crew members appeared to be on the verge of jumping overboard, but instead chose to remain on board with this deadly object that would now haunt their dreams going forward. As soon as he finished saying, "And though you fight to stay alive, your body starts to shiver, from no mere Templar can resist the vengeance of Black Fox." The Reliant and its crew were engulfed by black smoke and ash, which spread throughout the ship and even below decks, causing massive damage and nearly completely obscuring the ship from view. Only a few members of the water crew were left unharmed as the smoke and ash abruptly stopped and started to move back to where they had started. When they did so, they left behind nothing but burned corpses. As the smoke and ash returned to their master, they showed a young man who appeared to be insane and was holding a skull and spinal column attached in his hand. For each corpse, there was a tiny piece of red jewelry in the shape of a cross sitting in a pile of charred bones and ash. A piece of Templar's jewelry was hanging from the spinal column when he crushed the skull with his bare hand and roared a crazed laugh that was heard by everyone in the Land of Water's fleet, stopping them in their tracks. Knowing that he would be carrying the Phoenix Blade for a while until the new owner could be located in the previous test that the blade and the previous owner's soul had set forth, he then turned to see Morgan Landing as she went back to her regular activities, keeping the blade by her side in case any of these water dogs attacked. She bowed briefly to him as he handed it back and went back to his usual activities, realizing that he still had a lot to learn about these new skills the sword had given him. After that, the two of them turned to face the battlefield and saw that, instead of being destroyed, all of the remaining ships in the Land of Water were now surrendering. Few remained because some of the Spring Fleet had lured them within range of fort, sending many of them to the bottom of Long Ice Bay. Knowing full well that they were not yet finished but also that they were getting close, Naruto walked to the edge of the railing and gazed out over the battlefield. He then turned to his cousin and gestured for her to look for anything helpful on the ship. Then, grinning, Raven approached his nephew and said, "It is a true pleasure to see that you're not among the dead, Lady Morgan." After being taken aback to see that Raven Uzumaki himself was standing there, Morgan recognized the young man brandishing one of the 7 blades. "You're Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who helped my niece free this country from Dodo." "That is who I am indeed, but what has happened to me the last couple of months, I would appreciate it if you would keep who I really am quiet for now," Naruto said, looking back at the water after being taken aback by her remark. She assured him that she would keep his secret by nodding her head. Then he questioned her. "By the way, who is your niece?" She told him, "The daimyo of this country, you seem to have a way with people." Morgan was genuinely taken aback by the remark, but he could tell that the young man had a lot on his mind. "To the good people I am guardian, but to those who do evil I am an assassin and a plague upon them." One of her crew members approached her solemnly before she could ask any more questions, saying, "We have 5 casualties on board with 2 fatalities, milady. We did everything we could but it just wasn't enough." She gave him a nod as a member of her crew approached her and said, "Captain, we have to beach the ship because she's taken on too much water." As he dragged the prisoners off the ship in chains, Morgan turned to face the 2 Uzumakis, who nodded for her to continue working to save her ship. They started to depart, aware that this captured ship would soon join the others at the bottom of the bay. Land of Fire, Hidden Leaf Village, Golden Dragon Inn. As he watched a young woman with purple hair enter the room and take a seat next to him, Iruka remarked at a nearby table in his favorite restaurant inn. Anko was taken aback that this meeting was happening so quickly, but she assumed that something had happened. She said to him, "So, how did your meeting go?" "So far so good. No one suspects that the Blackbird is secretly our respective group's informant," he stated to her. She wanted to know the answer herself, so she asked him, as the old war hawk made his decision about what to do with them. "We've decided to bring Tsunade into the fold, as she's the only one we can do something about it," he said after giving her a nod. With a nod, Anko said, "I wish they were both still here to guide us. I honestly don't know what to do as I never completed my training." He read the menu to her as they placed their food order, fully aware that a lot had changed in the past year. "It was Blackbird's job to finish your training when she was taken from us. I'm not even sure his training is complete either, and with what happened that night it's going to be a long time before we can complete what's been denied us. I just wish we could have done more for him. What they did to Naruto wasn't fair. I know, we are the students of his parents and their orders and we could do nothing to protect him or even guide him. Thinks of that damned seal. Don't worry, my Templar Knight, we will help him stop these people when the time is right," she said, placing her hand on his as a sign of affection. Before they started eating, he smiled at her and said, "I know, my little assassin, I'm just worried it might take a very long time before we see him again." Land of Spring, Black Vixen Long Ice Harbor. While every ship that could be saved was docked for immediate repairs, the other ships that had only sustained minor damage were repairing out in the bay while simultaneously keeping an eye out for any trouble. Naruto and Morgan stood on the deck of the Vixen, overlooking the severely damaged Spring Fleet. Looking out at the fleet, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little uneasy, wondering if the real battle had just begun or if it was all over. However, Morgan couldn't help but occasionally glance at her own ship, which was presently berthed in one of the numerous dry docks awaiting repair. She then turned to face her fellow mariner lord and concluded that she had waited long enough to speak with him and had done so. She questioned him, "How much do you know about that blade at your side?" After giving his response some thought, he said, "Not long, but I have to admit that the whole walking skeleton thing with the elements acting as my skin was a bit new to me." That made her laugh, saying, "You've come a long way. Not many people can control the abilities of these blades so easily." The words, "I do not control the blade, nor does it control me. We work together to further our goals and save lives, but I sense I still have a long way to go in truly mastering what it has to offer me," caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow, turn away from the bay, and look her in the eyes. She was genuinely taken aback by that statement, but then she recalled that each person carrying one of these 7 mystical swords would have a unique experience. Her sword had demanded that she learn to control it before its secrets could be fully revealed to her. She smiled as she looked out over the bay once more and told him, "It's a little different for everyone who has chosen to possess one of these blades. The one I possess demanded control before its secrets would be revealed to me, and I have a feeling that I have a long way to go as well." Naruto simply grinned as he turned to face the bay again, but he could tell she was still asking questions. "You have more questions, do you not?" he asked. "Yes, I do. To put it bluntly," he asked her, "and they are?" She remained silent for just a few seconds, trying to think of the right questions to ask him. "I think my first one should be, what exactly did the Admiral do to you?" "He was one of 7 men came to my home village and demanded that I be handed over to them like a sack of potatoes. To them I had no rights as a human, and they were expecting my mother to cooperate. Instead we both fought back and pretty much wiped out their bodyguards as a result, but there were just too many of them." She inquired, "What happened next?" "Those 7 men went in for the kill and left her bleeding on the ground in my arms, and some guy wearing a mask with only one eye hole appeared before them, stopping them from taking me. But I remember each and every one of their faces for as long as I shall live." Now that she knew what had happened, she said, "So you will now seek revenge?" He stated with conviction and a sense of purpose, "No, I will not. Don't get me wrong, I want to kill them so badly, but I would be no better than them if I did." She felt a great deal of respect for this young man and could understand what he was saying. He cleared his throat and said it was time for her to share a portion of her story. "Now that you know a bit of me, what of you?" She knew this was going to happen. "As you know, my niece is the daimyo of this country. Her mother was my oldest sister when she married the man of her dreams and brought that little bundle of joy into the world." Naruto listened carefully as she went on, her heart heavy with grief over what had happened to her. They wanted to protect this country so much and help it. But then Dodo came into the picture, demanding that he deserved more than what he got and that they were leading this country into ruin. So he led a coup against his brother in an attempt to take over this country, and as you know it succeeded, she stated to him. She nodded her head in agreement as he said, "And here you are, now an outlaw in your own lands." She recalled her traumatic past by saying, "My fiancé copyright at the time was a ship captain and knew if we did not make a run for it, we would join my brother.in.law in death." What happened next? Another group of refugees met up with us and told us that Mist Ninjas had aided in the coup as well as some other organization that was unknown at the time. They told us about how they overheard some of the water forces talking about the rebellion in their homeland. She said to him because she knew more about her past. "It took us some time, but we eventually found members of the Resistance Navy and eventually joined up after we told them what happened back in Snow. Needless to say, they were surprised at what had happened." "So you joined the Resistance knowing that their fight was yours now?" "In more ways than one. Eventually my fiancé copyright was killed in one of the battles and he gave me the sword. And over time we won several battles against the Water Navy, but in the end by the very man you killed." "So what will you do now that they soon will know that you're alive?" she asked, and Naruto understood her completely. Although it was a really good question to ask and one for which she had no quick solution, the question totally baffled her. The lookout in the crow's nest yelled a desperate warning, "Ship sight," before she could even answer his question. As the Black Vixen prepared to ship for battle, everyone on board was moving quickly. Naruto was already wearing his powerful spyglass and observing the ship as it entered the bay. When he finally recognized the ship, the lookout yelled from above once more, "She's flying the colors of the land of water," which confirmed Morgan's very unfavorable suspicion that the ship was a member of the Water Navy. As one of the crew members handed Morgan a spyglass, Morgan couldn't help but curse. She then took a long look around the ship and understood who they were and why they were here now following the battle. It's an ambassador ship. They are undoubtedly here to set terms for surrender, but also to make it look like this was a peaceful surrendering power so no other nations will become involved in this conflict. She stated that she had previously witnessed it. After swiftly putting his spyglass away, Naruto started giving orders that they were not to fire unless the new enemy ship fired upon them. He also sent a quick message to the Spring Lord telling him to be ready for a visitor. He then gestured for Morgan and his uncle to follow him to shore so they could watch this so-called ambassador. The daimyo's palace, the war room, and the land of spring. Lady Koyuki stood at the ready as the water ambassador was escorted into her war room. Luckily nothing vital to the nation's defense was present at the moment. Directly about them was the assortment of assassins just waiting for an opportunity to strike. Morgan, a disguised member of the honor guard, was standing next to her niece. She knew the ambassador well because he had been the admiral's close friend. Naruto and the remainder of his family watched the ambassador and his two bodyguards carefully for any sign of treachery. The ambassador was clearly nervous as he walked into the room. One of his bodyguards cannot help but comment on their current situation and the feeling of being watched. "We must be careful, sir. If we present ourselves as a threat, I have no doubt that they will eliminate us on the spot." "Then keep your eyes open," the ambassador said, unable to help but agree with the statement. "I don't like this either, especially since we've just seen what's left of the dreadnought." The ambassador's group then came to a halt right in front of the Spring Daimyo, who turned to face them. Her stunning face was displaying a look of disgust as she said, "What do you want?" in a very authoritative tone. The investor's only thoughts were that we, his friend, had misjudged this woman and that his typical bearish demeanor had definitely made matters worse prior to the battle. The ambassador, on the other hand, hoped for a peaceful conclusion and was also trying to get her to sign the treaty he had drafted in the event that they won. The ambassador immediately made the decision to try to defuse the situation and wanted to limit further bloodshed after closely examining the room and noting how many armed guards were there, their hands on their weapons, waiting for trouble to break out. He attempted to place the blame on her, saying that it had worked with some of his opponents in the past, saying, "I understand that you are upset over what has happened, but clearly the fault is yours, not ours. We came here to get what was promised to us, nothing more. Our fault. It's very interesting you say that, since I know for a fact that your country eating my uncle in his coup against my father, and under international law if the proper heir takes back the throne, the party that helped the opposing force take the throne are not entitled to anything," he said, aggravating the situation. Fortunately, he was nowhere near it, a negotiation at the level of a movie executive. He no longer had a smile on his face when he realized that this daimyo was not your typical pampered daimyo. Rather, he was a serious individual with a strong backbone. Knowing that this would be much more difficult than he had anticipated, the ambassador actually swallowed a little of his spirit before approaching him slowly and projecting a sense of superiority that filled the room. She then said, "You will take what little survivors you have and leave my country, or I can just kill you right here right now," in an authoritative tone to avoid any blunders. "As you wish, my lady, however I believe it would be beneficial to us both if you would sign a peace treaty." The ambassador and his guards were taken aback by the remark, but he knew he had to try to get her to sign the treaty, which could later be used against her. To his astonishment, she accepted the treaty. At first, he smiled a little, but it vanished as soon as she took out a lighter and lit the piece of paper for everyone to see. Seeing such hard work being burned made his eyes so big they felt like they might burst from his skull. She then produced her own peace treaty and signaled her guards to have their weapons ready at all times. She then gave him the documents and an ink pen. "This treaty is much more agreeable to us. Now you will sign this treaty, or?" she said, leaving him speechless. Hoping he was mistaken about her tone, he asked her, "Or what?" She gave him a serious smirk before holding up the pen and saying, "Or we can just start killing you all what here right now, so are you done? It is all I need after all, since we are still technically at war, and I know that your country has a lot of enemies at this moment, and with the allies my country has you would be in a very difficult situation." The ambassador was truly surprised by what he had just encountered and realized that the only way he was going to get out of this was to sign. He quickly read over the documents and realized that the terms were quite favorable to both sides, but also had quite a few penalties on his country. The Spring Daimyo ordered copies of the treaty to be made and given to the ambassador, who said again, "There it is, ambassador, and now take your pathetic excuse for sailors and soldiers on the two ships that for the most part survived the attack, and please get the hell out of my territory." He reluctantly signed the treaty, knowing full well that there was nothing he could do. As he started to hear others discussing his current predicament, he nodded his head to her and started to walk away, saying, he better not make any detours, because she's only giving them enough to get back home. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when the ambassador left the room, and a number of people went to finish the prisoner transfer and get these water dogs out of their country. By this time, Morgan had removed the helmet she had been wearing to hide her identity, and the assassins just let themselves fall out of the throne room's superstructure, hitting the ground loudly enough to be heard and appearing to have nothing happened. The ambassador's remarks and manner of carrying himself largely infuriated Koyuki. Morgan approached her niece, who was still carrying the helmet under her right arm, and said, I can't believe you actually out-negotiated the negotiator. Inquisitive, Koyuki asked her aunt, the negotiator? Morgan nodded her head before speaking. He is sent in to negotiate the trees upon the lands and islands that the Land of Water has been conquering. He's responsible for making it look like a simple transfer of power, and he is not too concerned about using trickery either. As Raven put it, a most dangerous opponent indeed, but I seriously doubt that this is the end. In agreement with him, Morgan said, you have no idea, we need to keep an eye on him. Raven called to his nephew as the young man approached him and said, Naruto. He inquired, yes, uncle. Return to the Vixen and make sure that they leave, and in the morning we will meet, as I believe there are some things we have not had the opportunity to acquaint ourselves with because of this emergency. The young assassin gestured for his crew members to follow him out of the room, saying, I understand, see you later. I will need your assistance to find out if these structures are still around and to reclaim them if possible, since they were still have in our possession until your uncle performed his coup, that is, Raven said, turning to Koyuki and pulling out an extremely old map of her nation. Knowing that there was much more at stake in the future, the young daimyo approached the paper and then gestured for several of her men to come over and assist her fellow ruler. Neo-Caribbean's Fire Navy ship Phoenix. Kakashi couldn't help but gaze at the wind-heavy cruiser, which was now traveling with the Phoenix to the Land of Spring. It should come as no surprise that Gaara was staring back at him with an even more determined expression than before. Despite the fact that this was unsettling, the sensei of Team 7 had another idea and chose to investigate the possibilities, if any existed. After turning away from the railing, he proceeded to the special conference room that had been set up for the Leaf Ninja to use in this operation. Upon entering, he saw that the man he had come to see was the only other person there. As the old pervert put it, what do you want, Kakashi, because right now I'm really busy. I have to know, is all of this really necessary? Kakashi said, rolling his one good eye at that remark. Let me guess, you're wondering why I have not asked the toads to reverse summon him, right? Jiraiya asked, feeling as though he understood the young sensei's question. When Kakashi heard this and wanted an answer to his question, he could only nod his head in agreement. It's not so simple as you might think. There are quite a few rules and laws that the summoning animals and us the Summers have to live by. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way, or I would have tried it with Orochimaru and Anko. Jiraiya knew his young companion would ask. Incredulously, the older man went on, it's all part of summoner law. Unless Naruto breaks one of their sacred laws, there is nothing I can do to bring him back through reverse summoning. Kakashi continued to listen. Kakashi questioned, but what about fighting each other? As he considered the repercussions that now faced them, Jiraiya said to his younger companion, we can fight each other, but they won't. The snakes appear to be the only exception up to a point, that is. I wish none of this ever happened, Kakashi. All I wanted to do slowly remove the seal, make sure he was stable so I could teach him about ways of his father. Kakashi gave this a nod and started talking. I know what you mean. I was still learning everything about the order when all this happened. He knew that Naruto had only been brought in at a very late time because he had been his mother's personal bodyguard until the birth. Jiraiya was unable to disagree. Like you, I was brought in kind of late to everything that was going on, but at least my training was complete in the ways of our order. Had it not been for the elders, we would have been completely lost. In search of an answer that had eluded him, the young one-eyed man asked, but can we bring Naruto into the fold now? If the stories of this bloodline are true, he will become more assassin than Templar Knight? That's probably more true than I would like it to be. The only other Templars to help us out are the two elders of the village, and I do not trust them at this time, he said, causing Jiraiya to nod his head in agreement. They had been most helpful in some ways, so Kakashi was taken aback to hear this. But you said it yourself, they have helped us? He asked. But what is their true purpose, I ask you? What do you mean? Kakashi asked, unsure of what to say. Jiraiya, who had been suspicious of the two elders for a while, said in a firm voice, there have been times they have supported him or were trying to cripple him in one form or another. There is more to them than meets the eye, my young knight. I think I see which you mean. They were all in favor from the banishment. Except for Danzo, which surprised me for the old warhawk. The elderly pervert replied. Kakashi asked out loud, what could his game be? He did send one of his agents along with us. As he considered the future of the Templar Knights of the Hidden Leaf, Jiraiya remarked, I don't know, but in the meantime we need to prepare Akima in your last remaining student for induction in the order, as I think they can handle it. Kakashi was truly unsure. I'm not so sure about this, it may backfire, and let's not forget that he still views us as the reason his mother is no longer living. Jiraiya remarked, feeling older because he knew what a horrible choice he might have to make in the future to bring back his godson. His friends may be the only chance we have to convince him to come to our side. The only other option to bring him back is one I do not wish to consider, but it may have to be done. What are you talking about? The only other option to bring him back may be to use his mother's body as leverage, as you said that this could backfire and he really would come for our blood. The elderly gentleman replied. Kakashi said to the old sage, I hope to God you're kidding. I really wish I was. Tomorrow we begin the preparations to see if my granddaughter and your student are worthy of becoming Templar Knights. Be prepared. All Kakashi could think about was what had already happened and how uncertain the future was for him and many others. Akima was shocked by what she heard and realized that there was much more at stake than she had previously believed. The two men were unaware that the two young girls they were discussing were right outside the cabin and listening to their entire conversation. What the hell is going on, Sakura? The young girl asked her half-brother's teammate, an old friend. What we just heard only brings many more questions. As she attempted to comprehend what was happening, the young woman remarked, I really don't know anymore, but it's clear to me that we are about to be inducted into something very big. I don't understand why they would go such lengths. Why is he so important? Sakura realized there was much more going on and remarked, if his family and clan are as powerful as they say, it's clear to me that something big is about to happen and these Templars and assassins are deeply involved in, and right now we don't know enough about either. The younger sister questioned, you have a point there, plus the elders, what is their agenda in all of this? I don't know the answer to that, but if we let things play out as they are, might just learn a thing or two. Unbeknownst to either of them, a tiny mouse that looked to be made of ink had been listening in on the conversation between the two ninja elders and the young girls before running to his master. The two of them nodded and decided on their course of action. When it finally made it to its master, it leapt into a scroll and vanished into nothing but words. The pale man and his two friends started reading what was now on the parchment, fully aware that their work was just getting started. Both of the female companions were making every effort to locate their former friends who were now lost in the wilderness of life. Tenten, a year older than the first girl, had twin bombs on the side of her head. The young, attractive girl standing next to her had lavender eyes without pupils, but beneath her Demeter persona, there was a sense of both shyness and action. Hinata Hyuga, the clan heir, was a young girl who was desperate to find her friend who had been taken from her for a long time. She still remembers the boy of her dreams for both her actions and the friend who was taken from her due to the Dark Group's desire for power. One of the best young operatives in the Old War Hawk, the pale boy was known only as Sai. He was also an apprentice member of the Freemason Order, which had developed from the Eruditu group, which at the time had a large number of Freemasons. The two girls were quite sickened that they could think of him in such a way, and the three young people were shocked by the lengths the older Templars would go to in order to bring back their maelstrom when they read the message. According to them, Naruto had endured enough suffering and was rightfully entitled to a small portion, but their future plans and aspirations were shattering any hope for that. And to think I used respect that man? Tenten said, her contempt barely contained. We have to find some way to warn him about this, was another topic Hinata struggled to keep to herself. That woman be so easy. My master made it quite clear that I was to successfully deliver the information that would aid him in the future. The only problem is finding him. Sai was saying to them. Tenten reflected on what had transpired with her covert mentor and remarked, we just have to be careful is all. It's so hard to believe that Naruto of all people can complete not only my training but that of Anko's as well. Hinata said, almost with a hint of jealousy in her voice, We will just have to try harder and to keep a closer eye on all of them, including his half-sister. She was thinking about the young woman. I know you have a crush on him, but now is not the time, princess. The young Hyuga exclaimed. This is more than just a crush and you know it. I've seen how you look at him as well, Tenten. The young weapon master remarked. I'll admit I have feelings for him just like you do, but don't forget that he is part of the CRA now. The pale artist pretended to smile as he said, perhaps you should both down at this moment and worry about at least finding him first, then you can decide which of you will carry his first child, since that seems to be your goal at this moment. However, both of them were staring at him with a killer mindset. They both told him, shut up, Sai. Knowing how dangerous women could be, he prudently kept his mouth shut. He was ready to send this new information to his master along with a request for more instructions because of these recent developments. Land of Fire, Hidden Leaf Village, and Secret Root Base. Although he was aware that he had taken a significant risk by bringing the Hokage here, Danzo had no choice but to proceed down his base's corridor. As he entered the room, one of his agents was currently reviving her from unconsciousness. Tsunade nearly launched an attack as soon as she woke up and realized where she was, but she was stopped when she saw Danzo, and to her amazement, Iruka and Enko standing next to the elderly man. To be honest, she was taken aback by this until she realized that her subordinates didn't look like the ones she had last seen. The old warhawk then extended his hand to her, showing that his cane was merely a show and that he actually wanted to help her up. The old man nodded his head at her and gestured for her and the other two to follow him down the adjacent hall as he started talking. She grabbed his hand, knowing that she could still punch him through a wall at any time. I must apologize for the way we brought you here, but the Templars of the old ways are watching everything carefully now thanks to the young Maelstrom's departure. Still waiting for a chance to attack if necessary, she said. You mean Naruto? What the hell is going on? Do you remember the stories of your grandmother telling you about the assassins and their mortal enemies, the Templars? The elderly man asked, pausing and turning to face her. Since this also affected Naruto, she was genuinely taken aback. They're just stories. The old man remarked. How I wish that was true, because they are very real. Enko approached the Hokage and bowed slightly before pulling the cord attached to her unique jacket over her head. She then said, I'm still an assassin in training. Before her death, Kushina was my mentor in the ways the Assassin Brotherhood. After her death, Itachi continued my training until he was sent on his mission thanks to the Elders and the Dark Templars. The Hokage was genuinely taken aback when Iruka spoke next, saying, like Enko here, I am also part of a secret society connected to the Assassin Brotherhood. I am currently the only full-fledged member of the Templar Knights. My Grand Master was none other than Naruto's own father, the fourth Hokage. And I am the Grand Master of the Freemasons who evolved from an organization known as Eruditu. While not a member of organizations, your sensei was a good friend and ally to all of us as we tried to bring peace, freedom, and order to these chaotic lands, Danzo said, tapping his cane on the floor to get her attention. Tsunade was shocked to discover that many of the tales she had been told were true, and she was even more shocked to discover how much her predecessor and former teacher had actually known. Curious about the response, she said, this is a lot to take in, why even come to me? Knowing that she was about to learn a lot of secrets, Danzo gestured for them to follow him down the hallway once more. I'm afraid there is even more, but almost everything started with the murder of Lady Uzumaki and the sealing of her son's memories, he said. I knew there was something more to this, but I was never exactly sure, she replied. Tsunade was even more shocked when she realized who was in the beds after Danzo stopped in front of a door and opened it to reveal a special hospital wing with multiple females lying in them. Still not believing what she was seeing, she questioned, I thought they were dead. They were actually found alive, if just barely, the night of the Uchiha massacre and brought to the hospital. Unfortunately, someone tried to finish the job that very night, and if it was not for my old rival's concern about their safety and the fact that they had been looking into the murder of Kushina, they might have died that night. She hoped her theory was incorrect when she asked, you have had them here all this time and not done anything to help them? With the knowledge that many would expect him to do just that, or worse, turn them into baby factories, Danzo couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. I have tried to help them as best I can, but unfortunately our resources are limited to mostly combat-related injuries. So you believe that only someone of my caliber in the medical arts could treat them successfully? Tsunade asked, realizing that there was more to their condition. We have done what we can to fix some of the damage, but we lack your vast knowledge and experience. All we can do is make them as comfortable as possible and keep them as healthy as can be so that when they are revived it will be too difficult of a recovery." The aging warhawk spoke with a hint of sadness in his tone. Tsunade was still processing what she had seen and heard, but she also sensed that there was more to come. "I need to know everything I can about what's going on in the village and their conditions," she asked herself. "Despite what little information you have been told about us, you must know that if we agree you will be dragged into this and may not be able to get out of it. Are you prepared for that?" Danzo asked, turning to face Iruka and Anko in an attempt to gauge their reaction. She looked at him rather sternly and said, "Everything we worked for over all these years may be undone by people who only want power for themselves. If my sensei could not ignore this, neither can I," with a commanding tone. "These are some of my best agents at infiltration and information gathering. They will help you with anything you need to know, or for that matter anyone you think we can trust with what is coming," Danzo said, nodding his head in understanding before tapping his cane on the ground to attract the attention of several of his subordinates, who then introduced themselves to their leader and grandmaster. Long Ice Harbor, Land of Spring, Black Vixen. Everyone on board the Vixen literally had their fingers on the trigger, ready to begin bombarding the retreating vessels if they even made a wrong turn. Naruto and his crew watched with bated breath as the water fleet, or what was left of it, for that Matera, slowly left the bay and harbor of the Land of Spring. It was still impressive to see the ships limping out of the bay, still licking their wounds, and crammed with people because the Spring Daimyo wanted them to leave her country as soon as possible. Naruto released a breath that he was not even aware he was holding in as the crew started to feel a little less tense as the ships started to fade into the night. "Tomorrow morning you will have much to do, and much to see," his uncle said as he moved up next to him. Naruto was only able to nod his head as he gave his crew a number of orders and bid his uncle good night before retiring to his own cabin to contemplate what would happen the following day. Water Fleet, Ambassador's ship. The ambassador was still shocked that the new Mariner Lord had defeated the Admiral so easily, but he was even more shocked to hear that one of the old lords was still alive. He sat in his personal cabin of the ship and pondered what he had just been told by a few members who had survived the attack on the Reliant. After seeing the wreckage of the water fleet, which had been sent to defeat a weak enemy, he realized that everything had been for nothing and that the situation was much worse than he had initially thought. The fact that one of the Mariner Lords was still alive when he should have been dead, however, was like a huge red flag alerting him that their work was far from done. To be honest, they had never bothered to think about the impossible. The fact that this new daimyo had out-negotiated him so easily was another thing that had troubled him. It was an insult he could not ignore. Regretfully, he was limited in his options and understood that a lot would happen once he got back to the water capital, but they also couldn't afford to miss the chance to seize control of this territory and discover what secrets were still hidden there. Although he rarely acted without permission or even a plan, there were occasions when it was essential, if not absolutely necessary, and this was one of those occasions. He took a sip of his cognac and gazed at a collection of boxes on the table, wondering if his plan would succeed. He knew it was a risky one, but he also knew it would be difficult to trace it back to both him and the Land of Water. At that moment, someone knocked on his cabin door, and he said, "Enter." "You summoned me, my lord?" the red operative said as he walked further into the room and stood in front of the table with the odd boxes on it. The door opened to reveal a rather athletic-looking man with a blood-red vest that indicated which special organization he belonged to and some specialized armor adorning his body. "I have a special mission for you, and it will be quite difficult. There is even a small chance you might come back alive, and if you do fail, which is highly unlikely, but best to be safe than sorry, you can take nothing that will connect you to either me or the Land of Water. Do you understand?" the ambassador said, grinning as he set a drink on the table, stood to his full height, and placed his hands on the two outer boxes. He then looked into the red operative's eyes. "Yes sir, I do. I take it these boxes are for the mission?" he responded. Thinking of retaliation, the ambassador couldn't help but smile devilishly and say, "Indeed it is. Now here's what I want to do." Naruto's dreams and memories. After I went to sleep, my dreams about Arno started over. The only difference this time was that I was going through everything he had gone through, from his early years when he saw his father's lifeless body on the ground to the events that would eventually lead him to join the Brotherhood. I felt like my head was going to blow up from all the things I had experienced by reliving his memories, including his new eagle vision, which I felt was more like a pulse and allowed them to see everyone and everything of interest, much like a Hyuga using their bloodline to see nearly 360 degrees. Even though this new ability was incredible, it was nothing compared to his extraordinary ability to relive the memories of people who had died at his hands. For both him and me, it was like nothing we had ever experienced. The last glimpse into a person's life as he put an end to their evil existence was like nothing we had ever experienced. I experienced heartbreak at the end of those memories, but I also felt content and hopeful for the future. I also gained a deeper understanding of the creed, which had not left me in the least because each of my ancestors had to accept it. However, they swiftly moved on to another ancestor while I was still trying to comprehend and accept what I had just gone through with Arno. I saw Shay Patrick Cormac transition from assassin to Templar and all the heartache that would ultimately cost him, and I knew he must be related to my grandfather. After meeting Connor, I understood why Achilles had been so hesitant to teach other young people the assassination techniques, even though I had witnessed what could happen when the assassins allowed themselves to become quite the Templars and when their roles were completely reversed. Shay, however, was driven forward by a desire to do the right thing and recognize the injustice that had been committed in the assassin's name rather than being consumed by greed or retaliation. For every good man and woman on both sides, there are always those who sought power at all costs. I now realized that he had not been a Judas to them, but rather a necessary evil to put the colonists back in their proper position as guardians rather than tormentors. It had led Shay down a dark path that some would find unredeemable, but I realized that even as a Templar, he upheld the Brotherhood's principles more strongly than the contemporary members of the time, who committed some genuinely heinous acts. The killing headache that followed all of the knowledge and skills that the bleeding effect had made me absorb during the night came to a head as the morning light came through the window, waking me from my sleep. As the night wore on into the morning, I felt more and more of their memories and their connection to each other, no matter how tragic, had led to many lives being saved and many dark truths revealed. I knew that something significant was going to happen today, so as I fought to get out of bed, the pain started to subside and my skills and knowledge started to merge with me. As I started getting dressed and thinking about two ancestors who seemed so different yet so alike, I simply had no idea what was going to happen. Land of Spring, Long Ice Bay, Black Vixen's main deck. Naruto quietly left his private cabin and stood on the Vixen's main deck, taking in his surroundings. It was then that he saw his uncle approaching him, his face as objective as day. He inquired inquisitively, "So what is going to happen this day, uncle?" "First, I believe this will come in quite handy," Raven said, grinning as he approached his nephew and held out his hand to reveal a cloth mask with odd equipment integrated into it. Curious about the gadget, Naruto asked his uncle, "What is it?" and took it from him. "A specialized gas mask. Your ancestor Shay was known to use it from time to time." Raven grinned as he spoke. "Thank you, uncle. I take it there is much more to do today," said Naruto, who was astonished and readily accepted the mask as he put it around his neck for convenience and realized it would be useful. As the two of them departed the ship and headed into the city, the older man said, "Indeed, now follow me as we have much to do." They soon came to a rather dilapidated building that appeared to be pleading for assistance. Solomon Dornas, one of the few master assassins still serving in the Brotherhood, was standing in front of the building. Solomon grinned as the two approached him. "I was wondering when you two would arrive. The Lady Daimyo is already inside along with a special group of contractors who can be trusted to rebuild the facility, Lord Raven." Looking at the building, Naruto was taken aback and asked, "What's the deal with this building?" As Solomon chose to educate his young friend, Raven couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this. "Well, Lord Naruto, this used to be one of our many secret headquarters and training facilities for the Brotherhood that not even the Order was aware of." Naruto was only able to whistle when he understood the significance of this building, but he had to know the awful response he anticipated. "I take it something bad happened, right?" The old man merely requested a nod of continuance, saying, "Unfortunately, Lord Dodo the Templar bastard, if you pardon my use of language." The older assassin saw the two of them thinking deeply about what he had said and gestured them inside the building. He was responsible for a large number of cleansinges, as he called it, not only removing what was left of the Brotherhood but also what remained of the Templar Knights from this land. "Can this building be salvaged?" Koyuki asked as one of the safety inspectors and construction workers approached her in the spacious hallway. Their faces were a mix of surprise and hope. "This building should be condemned. The wiring is substandard, it is completely inaccurate for anyone's needs. And the neighborhood is like a demilitarized zone." said the safety inspector, who was wearing rather plain clothing and wearing rather thick glasses. Though genuinely taken aback by his directness, Koyuki had to repeat her query, so it can be salvaged, right? It's not impossible, my lady, but it won't be cheap. Your uncle really gave this building a beating, but yes, it can be salvaged and repaired better than new, said the construction worker this time. They nodded to her and started looking more closely at the building as she started to return to them. Good, I will leave the preparations with Mr. Dornas here, she said. Following her arrival, Raven said, Solomon here will be responsible for the facility becoming a useful part of not only the community but to help us rebuild the brotherhood here. Well, that is good to hear. I hope to see you soon, mentor, said Naruto, who was taken aback by this and realized that many things were finally going to start to get better. As Solomon moved closer to monitor the reconstruction process, he remarked, as do I, young mentor. The land of Spring, or Spring Bay. By this point, Naruto, Raven and Koyuki had approached a small section of the bay where Morgan was waiting for them. Naruto could tell that a significant event was about to take place. All right, it's time for you to learn about what else this sword of yours can do, she said, smiling warmly as she approached Naruto. He then nodded his head while she kept talking. Now, as you know, each of the swords belongs to a very specific region of the Neo-Caribbean. For example, my sword known as the Blizzard hails from this land that used to be known as Snow Country. And as you have seen by my transformation earlier, I can easily control ice and snow elements. Naruto nodded his head in agreement as she went on. All of the blades are more powerful on water than they are land, but there are some exceptions to this. For example, if my blade were to be in an area that is covered in nothing but snow and ice, my sword would have a clear advantage over many others. She nodded her head positively and smiled as he said, I think understand now. It's like how elemental techniques are more powerful when the particular element is present. As he examined the sword in his hand, Naruto was taken aback by the realization that, yes, each blade is different from the others. However, according to legend, the Maelstrom is probably the most powerful of them all because it is said that the Sage of the Six Paths was the first to wield the blade. The next power that only a Mariner Lord could have because of their special blades was revealed when Morgan could tell he was impressed by the blade's history. That's not all. Each one of these swords is also connected to a very specific kind of summoning animal. For my sword, the Iceberg, as it is more commonly known, I have the unique ability to summon polar bears that are bigger than our ships. How do you? Naruto asked his uncle, who merely nodded his head in agreement with her account. She then smiled at him, indicated the small cliff they were at, and started giving directions, saying, First of all, like all summoning, cut your finger and put blood upon the blade for a start. After following her instructions, he watched her stand back up and said, Now push your energy into the blade itself and think of the animal and it will be summoned. Naruto followed instructions once more, felt it, and watched as a strange wave appeared on the water and seemed to pulse with energy. He then stood there, waiting for something to happen. He then turned to face Morgan, wondering if he had done something wrong, only to see their faces take on a rather unusual expression as a shadow seemed to slowly engulf them. The frightening part wasn't that Naruto turned around, feeling a little worried, only to be confronted by one of the biggest creatures he had ever seen. The terrifying aspect was that the creature's mouth, which was composed of hundreds of teeth that appeared to be able to serve as ammunition for the main cannons, appeared to widen as it started to scream and howl at him. Everyone else could only start to wonder what he was feeling and be grateful that they weren't in his position, as it appeared to vocalize at him for almost 10 seconds, sending what could only be described as basketball-sized slime balls at him. After opening his eyes, Naruto started to shake and pick up some of the slime that had been thrown to the ground from his body. He looked up at the creature and had to acknowledge that, despite the fact that it felt disgusting, at least it didn't smell bad. It's not so bad, hello beastie, he said. Their confusion was only heightened when Naruto unexpectedly walked forward and said, It's nice to meet you then, Mr. Kraken. To everyone's surprise, a sound then came from the creature, almost as if it was laughing at his remark. Koyuki was incredulous at what she was witnessing when one of the tentacles landed squarely in front of him. He then extended his hand and shook the creature's appendage, and the two of them launched into a silent conversation. Some summoning animals do not communicate with the spoken word but rather with their mind, Morgan said, observing her niece's perplexed expression. The Kraken is said to be one of the most powerful summoning animals to ever roam the sea. With a nod of comprehension, Naruto watched as the Kraken returned to the water and vanished under the waves in a matter of seconds. He continued to smile as he approached his other friends. "It looks like you'd had a lot to talk about," asked Morgan, impressed. "We did. Apparently he's the new chief of his clan, and he said that grandmother used to carry him in her arms when he was still small when she first got the sword." Raven instantly smiled as he recalled the tiny animal that, despite what some may believe, was quite adorable when it was a young child, and that his older sister could not resist holding like a teddy bear. The elderly man recalled better days and remarked, "I remember that well. Even your mother had a fondness towards him, as I recall she even rode on his back at the beach one time." Raven then advanced and made a series of hand gestures before slamming his palm into the ground, which caused a lot of smoke to rise. When the smoke cleared, a rather large eagle with light armor on its chest and what appeared to be specially made weapons for its feet was visible. "I would recommend summoning the Chief Toad, as we have much to discuss," Raven said, turning to face his nephew. Following his instructions, Naruto summoned a rather large red and orange toad, but to his astonishment, he also discovered two smaller and much older toads on the ground. This surprised Naruto, who simply bowed to the two elders before turning back to face his uncle, who then walked in front of the powerful animals. "I did not expect to see Gamabunta or the elders of the Toad clan here today, but it is a pleasant surprise nonetheless," the large eagle said, turning to face the elderly assassin after honoring its fellow summoning animal with its head. After removing his pipe, the big toad said, "The feeling's mutual, Toulon. It's been a long time indeed, my old friend." To everyone's astonishment, the two older toads approached Naruto first and bowed slightly before they started talking, saying, "I did not think I would see Minato and Kushina's boy here this day, but it appears that the memory seal has been broken finally." When Naruto realized what they had said, he was speechless and came to the shocking conclusion, "You know who my father is." "Yes, we know who he is, but before we explain it, I want you to know, Naru, boy, that Jiraiya or Akima cannot remove you from the contract without our say.so, and right now they're in some serious hot water with us," said Gamabunta, who was unable to help but close his eyes in pain over that memory, which the boy who was seeking answers had noticed. The older toads then decided to continue, realizing there was much to say. This information was at least somewhat relieving to Naruto, who was terrified that this would occur or that the toads would support Jiraiya and decide to sever his contract completely, making the fourth's daughter the main summoner. The young man then said in a tone that was almost imploring, "Please, who was he? I need to know." Naruto and Toulon were curious to hear what the older toads would say next. The elder toad raised his eyebrows and said, "Your father's name was Minato Namikaze, or more commonly known as the fourth Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, and was the Templar Grand Master of the Knights and an enemy to the Red Templars, who have done all in their power to eliminate both the Knights and the Brotherhood." Everyone in attendance watched as Naruto struggled to process the information he had been given and just collapsed to the ground while still attempting to understand what he had just learned. "How is this possible?" he asked himself. As her husband went on to say, "I know it's a lot to take in, but believe it or not, he really did love you. Don't get me wrong, your mother was still quite pissed off that he had gotten drunk with that young woman and conceived a second child, but she understood it wasn't something he did to spite her either. It just happened." The female elder toad, who many call Mom, approached him and placed her hands on his left arm in a consoling manner. Still trying to figure everything out, he said, "Then that means that she's my sister, and she still wanted to pretty much enslave me." Knowing that he needed to hear this, the female toad quickly responded, "Not anymore, she doesn't. Her aunt was the reason she treated you the way she did, and now that she knows the truth, everything has changed. I want you to know that they cannot reverse summoning back to the village, so there is no need to break the contract with us. In fact, they are both in big trouble for their actions regarding you," said the male elder toad, approaching the boy to look him in the eyes and discuss what needed to be said. With an almost beseeching expression that conveyed the suffering he had endured, Naruto could not help but ask Gamabunta, "Why didn't you tell me when I first summoned you that day?" Knowing this was coming for a while, Bunta simply chose to respond to the young man by saying, "Believe me, I wish I could have told you, but if we had, Jiraiya would have simply erased it from your mind all over again. However, we knew that once the seal broke, there was nothing he could do to stop us from telling you everything we could." Knowing that the old pervert had contributed to a lot of his suffering in one way or another, Naruto could not help but grow angrier and angrier at the news. He also had a feeling that he was going to learn more information that would make him feel even worse. "And I'm afraid that is not all. You see, Jiraiya is also her grandfather and your godfather, as well as a Templar knight in training." Bunta knew the boy had a right to know this additional information that had been withheld from him, and he was regrettably correct. With trembling and barely contained rage, Naruto slowly stood up and walked toward a tree. He then screamed in a guttural way and punched the tree in the middle, temporarily destroying it while also using his sword's powers to help. As the tree flew backwards off the cliff and into the water below, creating a small wave in the process, he turned to face them and looked at his hand, which now resembles a skeleton covered in smoking ash. The display of power and abilities that he possessed at his disposal astounded everyone present, including the humans and the summoned animals. Not too far away, the members of his crew stood watching, unable to believe what they had seen and heard, knowing that he had experienced so much in such a short period of time. When things returned to normal, he fell to his knees and lost control of the emotions he had suppressed for so long in some cases. The team that the negotiator had sent watched from a little further away, but they had no idea what was really happening and were only waiting for an opportunity to attack. So much I have left to learn. I don't know why my life is so complicated, it just doesn't make any sense to me, Naruto said, looking up at everyone while wiping the tears from his eyes and finding it hard to believe he still had any left. Then Raven approached his nephew and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, saying, "Your emotional wounds will only faster at this moment because you have been denied so much, and I'm afraid the infection will only get worse with time if you allow it." Looking his uncle in the eyes, Naruto said, "My life has not even been my own for a long time, and even now there's still so much I do not know, and what I do find out often causes me pain." Naruto could not help but laugh at this. Raven knew his nephew needed to hear this, so he said, "But you are not alone anymore, and I have no intention of letting them take you away from us and doing whatever it is they wish to you." Then, knowing that the young man still needed to hear, Bunta cleared his throat and said, "Jiraiya may still be a Templar Knight in training, but there is still one full-fledged knight and 2 members of the Brotherhood in the Leaf, even if one of them is currently on a long-term mission." Naruto was truly taken aback when Toad kept on talking. "Your former sensei from the academy, Iruka, is currently the only full-fledged knight in the village, maybe nowhere near the old pervert's level, but he knows all the tricks the knights use to preserve peace and order without taking away your freedom. As we're the only assassin left in the village that I know of is none other than his girlfriend, and as you once called her, the crazy snake lady. Anko is an assassin in training." "How and who is the other assassin?" asked Naruto. The more senior Toad responded, "I'm afraid to say you have already met him, Naruto. After all, he did come for you and is a part of the organization known as Akatsuki. It's Itachi, isn't it?" he inquired, seemingly anticipating the response. "Yes, he is. Both he and Anko were your mother's students, as she was the last true assassin in the village before her death," the elderly Toad replied. Naruto questioned them, "Does Jiraiya know about them?" Seeing the hateful expression on the man's face again, the old Toad saw the urge to strike something again and said, "Thankfully no, he does not. Your father also had a second student he brought in late alongside the old pervert, and I think you know who it is as well." Knowing the answer was no, he said, "Hitaki, this just makes me hate him even more. And they're coming for me, aren't they?" Next, Mom said, "Yes, they're looking for you, but I'm afraid whatever plans they have might just be derailed by another." The Toads could only nod their heads in agreement. He inquired, unsure of the response, "Who would this be?" Still struggling to believe herself, she answered, "By the Fire Daimyo himself." In contrast, Raven had his own epiphany, so he still hasn't forgotten about us, and thank God. The question, "What do you mean, uncle?" caught everyone's attention. "Your grandmother and I, along with your grandfather, were responsible for stopping an assassination attempt of the Fire Daimyo when the assassin order was still at its height of power. The daimyos of that time was attending a peace summit, and if any of them had been killed, it would have resulted in the Second Ninja War breaking out much earlier." Everyone was taken aback when Raven went on. "Needless to say, the Fire Daimyo agreed to assist us in trying to put the world back together using the teachings of the Templars to keep the peace and order, and the skills of the assassins to remove any threats from the shadows that might destroy freedom for everyone. He was the one who made it possible for us to safely hide amongst the world when the Second War did begin. Is there something wrong with the village government and they want something important and they need me for it? So the question has to be, what do they want with me?" was the next realization Naruto had. "Do you have an inkling about what they want?" Raven asked, nodding his head as he glanced up at the Toads. "Unfortunately, we do not know what their plans are regarding the Fire Daimyo for that matter. but we can guess that something big is happening in the current events and the Neo-Caribbean is going to play a big part in it, the powerful toads said, nodding their heads negatively as they realized that even they were in the dark. Then he said, "This has truly been a rather unique day, but the questions that have been answered only lead to more questions," to which Toulon could only nod his head. "It would indeed, old friend. I am sorry that this conversation has taken such a drastic turn," Raven said, glancing up at the large eagle. After giving Naruto his whole attention, Toulon simply nodded his big head and said, "It was a pleasure to meet you, young eagle. When your mind and soul have cooled, summon us again and we will discuss much about what we can do together. At the moment you need some time to think and we will see each other again. Gamabunta the elders, it was a pleasure to see you again. Likewise may you fly true." "Oh, and Naruto," Bunta said to his old friend, and the elder toads smiled at him. "Remember, if you have to fight your sister or the old pervert, remember, thanks to summoning law we cannot aid any of you unless something has been done to violate the terms of the summoning contract. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Naruto said, looking up at Bunta like a big toad. As the summoning animals all started to depart from this plane of reality, he said, "Yes, I do thank you for the advice and warning." One of the two complete squads of red mercenaries still in hiding appeared poised to attack, but his leader cut him off with the words, "Not yet, it needs to be a little more public if you get my meaning." Knowing that their time would arrive soon, he and the other red operative could only smile. However, it wasn't long before one of them noticed what appeared to be two ships just starting to emerge from the horizon. "The Father of Understanding will provide for us a mighty audience for our duty this day. Let's make the preparations as soon as possible to strike as soon as they arrive in the palace," the leader said, laughing at their good fortune in knowing who would be watching their upcoming display. Knowing that this would be an incredible show, they all started to take out the equipment they had been given. Knowing that he had a lot on his mind, Naruto got up and walked up beside the cliff, admiring the ocean in profound thought. It was then that he began to notice something on the horizon and used his eagle vision to get a better look. He was shocked to see two ships rapidly approaching the land of spring on the horizon. He swore softly and reached into one of his back pockets to get his spyglass so he could have a better look. As they got closer to the cliff, the other people there realized right away that something was amiss. Naruto then gave his uncle the spyglass and gestured toward the horizon. Through the spyglass, the older man saw two ships, one of which was obviously from the land of wind, but it was actually from the land of fire. As he returned the spyglass to his nephew, Raven struggled to control his contempt, saying, "It would appear we are about to have some unwanted company." Feeling that his wrath and fury would soon rise again, Naruto turned away from the cliff and said to his uncle, "Only one of them unwanted, uncle. We had better get back to the palace and prepare for their arrival." Knowing that they would soon be very busy, Raven said, "Agreed," and started to leave the cliff. "It looks like the land of water left some people behind. How do you wish to proceed?" Naruto said softly to his uncle. "If I am right, they also know of the ships on their way here as well, and if I am right they will make a very public appearance for whatever they have planned," Raven said, continuing to walk without turning around after gaining an idea of their plans. "I believe a stalling tactic is in order, uncle, so that we can get a few more people in the main hall," the young assassin replied. "I agree with you. Let's make sure it's an event they will not forget." Phoenix, Fire Vessel, Long Ice Bay, Land of Spring. As they entered the Bay of the Land of Spring, Jiraiya was standing at the bow of the ship, looking over the bow. At this precise moment, Akima approached her grandfather and occasionally looked over at their shadow, as she had come to refer to it. As he looked at the wind vessel and saw that the young redhead had also taken up residence at the front of his ship, the older of the two could not help but feel that his years were catching up to him. The old pervert was still trying to figure out how they were able to know so much, and this was nagging at the back of his mind. Akima felt a silent rage and bloodlust all rolled into one when she looked at the redhead. Was this her brother's fate, she wondered? She pondered his current response to their sibling status, but she didn't deceive herself into thinking it would be a pleasant encounter given what she had already tried. The only thing she could do was hope that things would improve and that he would listen. She then went to the ship's bow and, as the bow cut through the water, she looked over the side to see what it was like to be a real sailor. Seeing the same expression on her parents' faces, her grandfather said, "Everything's going to work out, you just need to come down and have faith." She had the unshakable feeling that there was more going on than she could possibly comprehend, and based on what she had already discovered, things did not appear promising. She said to him, "You don't understand, grandfather." He looked directly at her as she repeated her argument. "He views me as nothing more than an enslaved, and as for our father, he views him as nothing more than an evil man who ruined his life. And then there's you." "I did what I did because I thought it was right thing to do at the time," Jiraiya said, anticipating a moment like this. It's easy to look back and judge someone for what they did, Akima. But it's a completely different matter to live it. Says the man who had a choice. "Did you even consider all of the consequences that would befall us? You didn't even bother to see how I looked at him?" she asked, turning her head and meeting his eyes directly. "I know, and I will have to live that every day of my life, but as I said to Tsunade, there is more going on than you can possibly understand," he replied to her. "Lord Jiraiya, we should be docking in the next 5 minutes, but I'm not sure if we will receive a warm welcome if you get my dry tea trail." "What the hell?" said the Phoenix's captain before anyone could say anything more. When the two ninjas turned back to face the bow, they were met with a sight that would haunt them until the day they died. They knew immediately that something had captured his attention, and not in a positive way. Many crew members were so shocked that they asked, "Is that the legendary dreadnought of the Land of Water?" Another person said, "It's been cut in two, but by what?" As the ship dodged the wreckage, the captain was in disbelief, saying, "I didn't think the Land of Spring had this kind of firepower." Still in shock, Jiraiya uttered, "Me neither. Grandfather, what is going on?" Akima asked, still trying to figure out what was happening and why everyone appeared terrified. He replied to her, still in shock, "That is a legendary dreadnought and the first of its class. It is the only one of its classic are made, in fact. It gave the Land and Water a huge advantage when it would invade countries it considered weak." He was still staring at the larger wreckage. The captain continued, "The thing was so powerful and it had been constantly upgraded over time to be even more dangerous in a fight. That thing could give the entire fleet of the Land of the Fire a run for its money without a problem whatsoever. But seeing it like this just seems impossible unless..." "Unless what, Captain?" Akima asked, her curiosity unabated. "Unless the ghost fleet of the Land of Whirlpool rose from its watery grave and struck at them, because there's no other fleet warships they could do that kind of damage," he said, turning his head to face her. As she listened, the Phoenix's crew heard whispers of the ghost fleet, and she still couldn't believe it. What had they gotten themselves into? Land of Spring's main auditorium. As Koyuki, the daimyo of the Land of Spring, sat on her throne, she waited for the newcomers who had just arrived for their own reasons, which she did not yet know. She was also aware of a possible danger near her young friend and was taking precautions to keep her lands and people safe. Two small groups of warriors representing two of the most powerful nations in the elemental countries entered the audience hall as the large doors opened. One group was led by a red-headed young boy, while the other group was led by an older man who was obviously their teacher. However, she had some issues with the second group, which was led by the renowned pervert and sage Jiraiya of the Hidden Leaf. She knew that things would get interesting from this point on. As per protocol, one of her samurai then approached her and started introducing them, saying, "My lord, allow me to introduce you to Lord Baki of the Land of Wind, who currently represents both his Lord Daimyo and the hidden ninja village of Sand." As the samurai went on with their introductions, Koyuki bowed her head in respect for them, saying, "And this my lord is Toad Sage Jiraiya, representing the Fire Lord of the Land of Fire and its ninja village." She narrowed her eyes at the old pervert in a hostile gesture, showing no respect, unlike the respect she had shown Baki of the Sand Village. "My lady, allow me to first convey my lord's wishes for your continued good health and prosperity of you and your nation." Jiraiya knew right away that things would not be easy, but he had a job to do and had to do it. She blinked at this, but she maintained her angry expression as he went on, "I have come to your nation in hopes of finding someone very important to the Hidden Leaf," she said. "And just who are you looking for?" Jiraiya had been terrified to ask. "His name is Naruto Uzumaki, my lady. There was an incident in the village." "An incident, you say? And what kind of incident would involve this nation's hero who assisted me not only retaking my throne but also beating some sense into my head, if I may be so bold to ask?" he said, pausing when he saw the contemptuous expression on her face. Now that he realized that things could either go really well for them or, as many of the sailors would say, turn out to be a total clusterfuck, Jiraiya was perspiring a lot. Nevertheless, he had to try to keep his relationship with the Land of Spring intact in addition to getting the boy back. Because of what her young hero had told her about this man and the young blonde girl standing next to him, Koyuki found it extremely difficult to maintain her composure. Nevertheless, she could sense that something was about to happen because she was a young woman. The incident in question revolves around his former teammate, the Uchiha boy who managed to defect from the village My Lady thanks to the actions of one of our enemies, said Akima, who this time stepped forward and bowed her head in respect for the woman. Unfortunately, the council of our village decided to make someone suffer for the incident and chose Naruto for unfortunately classified reasons. The actress said, and what was this punishment if I may ask? Banishment, My Lady. Unfortunately for the council, things have changed. Akima felt as though she was being closely examined, and in a sense, she did. Since Koyuki was unaware of these facts and the young man was obviously paying attention, she became very curious. And this change, what is it? She asked. She inhaled deeply before responding. The Fire Lord himself has become involved in this matter, My Lady, and wishes the young man brought back to the village to resume his duties as soon as possible and for a public apology by the council to be made to him as the first sign of penance. She was addressing the spring daimyo. Koyuki sensed right away that something more was happening and felt compelled to find out more, but the unexpected visitors chose this particular moment to make their presence known. The group leader then moved forward and stood in front of her, attempting to project as much fear as possible. All of them were dressed in the attire and armed with the Land of Snow's Ninja Force's gear. Well, Lady Koyuki, it would appear that we have come to settle the score with you at a rather bad time. But for the crimes you have committed to this nation and your uncle, I guess an audiences is appropriate. To his astonishment, however, Koyuki simply started to laugh as she addressed the man directly and said, "Your show was quite amusing and I find it very adorable that you believe that you will win." As he took a kunai from his couch and prepared to slit her to pieces, the head ninja became extremely agitated and said, "Don't mock me, you bitch, with you dead and gone things and go back to the way they're supposed to be." But she smiled at him menacingly and added, "I'm afraid that won't be happening, and I do find it rather curious how you're still able to hold that kunai." As he raised an eyebrow in reflection, he was genuinely attempting to determine what kind of drugs she had been smoking. Sadly, this was short-lived as he felt pain shoot through his arm, which was holding the offending weapon. The man was distinguished in every way. His clothing was arranged in such a way that, even now, it perfectly hidden his face from you, save for the monocle over one of his eyes. In a split second, the thing that had been severed from his body appeared to be wire floating in midair, and then an elderly man emerged from behind her throne. As he walked up to the other team members, the older man chuckled a little and said, "Now please be so every time asked to tell me who wants daddy's belt." Knowing that their mission was now in danger, the three men rushed the old assassin, only to be sliced to pieces as he shot out his wire. The remaining fake snow ninjas then started hurling weapon after weapon in an attempt to hit Daimyo. Unfortunately, they had neglected to look up because they were too focused on the enemy in front of them. At this precise moment, a number of assassins started to kill the remaining members by air. In a matter of seconds, Naruto killed 2 targets simultaneously with his own air assassination and rushed the last member, stabbing him in the chest to end his life. He then focused on the first man who would try to attack. When Koyuki saw that the man was attempting to do something with his clothes, he hurried over and slashed the man, killing him in the process. Because of his ancestors' abilities, which were now also his, he then began to experience the man's memories. The ambassador from the Lender Water stood in front of the man he had just killed and said, "I have a special mission for you and it will be quite difficult." He started to see them flowing before him. The deceased man remarked, "I understand, sir. Are these boxes part of the mission?" "Yes, they are. You are to infiltrate and eliminate that bitch of a daimyo, and if you can make as public and international as possible, all the better. But remember, nothing can connect you to the Land of Water or our Lord. Do I make myself clear?" As the memories faded, Naruto pulled his hand back, allowing the body to fall to the ground. However, as soon as the explosives went off, he followed his instincts and swiftly grabbed the body and threw it out of a nearby window. As he approached to stand by his uncle, he saw the shocked expression on Jiraiya's face and said, "Lord Raven, it can't be you, you're dead." Everyone was stunned by what had just happened. Raven turned to the elderly pervert and cursed, "Reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. It is only logical to assume that everyone thought I was dead, as I have been trying to rebuild what is left of the Land of Whirlpools." Seeing the elderly Uzumaki alive and well, knowing full well what this man is capable of, gave Jiraiya new cause for concern. The elderly man approached him with a sharp gaze and said, "What is this I hear of my nephew being banished because of a failed retrieval mission?" Jiraiya tried to regain control of the situation by saying, "Well, there were some incidents, but as none of your concern as we are trying to bring young Naruto home where he belongs." Jiraiya was aware of how dangerous this elderly assassin was. But the older man's next question, "And what if my niece?" caught the old pervert off guard. This time Akima was the one to speak. "I'm afraid she was killed, Lord Raven. Her son is the only witness to the crime and is the other reason we need him back in the village." With a stern tone, Raven said, "You only speak a half-truth, my dear, and yet I sense there is much more that you are not telling us about one of my few family members left in this world." He narrowed his eyes at her. "There are many that there are too many eyes and ears present and do not need to know that present, but he is my brother, we share the same father but different mothers," Jiraiya said, turning to his granddaughter in a quick gesture to get her to stop talking. "A rather bold claim, my dear. Unfortunately, if you believe this will allow you to take custody of him, you are sadly mistaken," the elderly assassin said, squinting his eyes at her. Her grandfather stepped in front of the older man, looking defiant, and said, "The same to be said about you. You have no rights in his life and I am his godfather." She was shocked by this. The old man recalled past losses that fueled his rage and said, "You seem to think that I care about that. My people were hunted to extinction, and where was your village when we need you the most? How many my friends and family died because you did not come and help us?" The old pervert, hoping to win the argument, said, "We are getting off topic. Naruto is a citizen of the Land of Fire. You have no legal claim to him." When Jiraiya and his granddaughter tried to rush the elderly man because they were upset about what had just happened, they discovered that two young assassins had placed multiple weapons at their throats. Naruto had held the maelstrom at his sister's throat, and his cousin Karen had held one of her hook blades at the old pervert's throat. As tensions increased, Koyuki chose to act as a mediator, saying, "Enough both of you, Captain Fox. Please refrain from any more violence in this audience hall as well as your crew member. Until I know everything about what is going on at once she was out of my tasks. Do not think we are on good terms." Guards removed the hidden leaf ninjas. As they nodded their heads at her and took their weapons from their enemies' throats, Koyuki stood up straight and walked down to the old pervert. The room echoed, "Yes, my lady," as they were led out, aware that the situation had just gotten much more complicated. "When I killed the leader I saw his memories and was the ambassador sent all of this in motion. One is so valuable in this country besides its technology they want." Naruto boldly approached his uncle and Koyuki as soon as the doors in the Leaf Ninja were closed. "There are many mysteries this land as well as our own there connected, and yet I feel this not over," Raven said, recalling a project the two countries had worked on in the past. It was a terrifying realization that they needed to learn more about their enemy. Koyuki nodded her head in agreement and then spoke. "Mei has recently come in contact with her remaining members of the Resistance Intelligence Organization back in the Land of Water and should be able to warn us of any future problems. In the meantime, we need to repair and outfit ourselves just in case something like this happens again." The three assassins nod their heads in agreement, fully aware that the situation was a joke. Naruto also had to acknowledge that he had an odd feeling about his sister. This feeling was the same as when he was standing next to Morgan, who informed him that the Phoenix Blade might have selected a new wielder. All he could think about was what would happen the next time they crossed paths. The capital of the Land of Water is the Water Palace. One of the most lavish structures in the Land of Water was the capital's crown jewel, the Water Palace, which had housed the government as well as the daimyos of both the past and the present. For a brief period, the palace was serene and tranquil, but it was destroyed when a particular person entered the hallways and made his presence known to everyone. The negotiator, also known as the Water Ambassador, walked down the Water Palace corridor with a purpose in mind. His negative emotions were so intense and powerful that everyone could see and feel them, even from a distance. The negotiator's anger was evident on his face as he moved down the corridor. Three of his most dependable red bodyguards, who are among the most combat-tested soldiers the mercenary organization had produced, were right behind him. One of the servants then noticed him making his way to the main reception hall, where the current water daimyo was handling state business. The room was rather large and elaborately decorated, rivaling the palaces of ancient France in their prime. The service in question bowed quickly and started to open the doors, gesturing for someone else to assist him with his task off to the side. The water daimyo's enormous throne was obscured by shadows, revealing only the daimyo's details. His peculiarly colored eyes, one green and one blue, seemed to draw attention more than any other feature. Despite what the pitiful Templars believed, Daimyo turned to face one of his most trusted warriors and lieutenants as soon as he heard the ambassador's footsteps enter the spacious hall. Based on his friend's movements, he deduced that something had happened that would severely disrupt their plans. The daimyo made his point very clear when he ordered, "This will be a private conversation, all others will leave." Now, as the room became completely empty of everyone but the two men in question, the negotiator approached his friend as soon as the room was clear and stayed on his throne, but it was obvious from the narrowing of his eyes that he was unhappy. "What has happened to put you in such a foul mood?" he asked. In front of the daimyo, the negotiator acknowledged that he could express some of his darker feelings. "The invasion was a failure. They knew we were coming and set a trap for the foolish admiral. He walked right into. And what of the admiral, if I might ask? Dead as well as almost 80% of his crew, plus the heavy assault class dreadnought has been destroyed. Whatever the hell happened to it was strong enough to break it in two." The negotiator was thinking about the wreckage. The Water Lord was greatly surprised by this because he knew that the ship in question was the best weapon for capturing a small nation's port, so hearing that it had been so completely destroyed was alarming. Hoping for a good result this time, he inquired, "Were you able to acquire any survivors?" He said to his friend, "They let me keep 3 ships, but they were, how shall I say, disarmed of all weaponry and only given enough food to make it back to the land of water. I have only been able to piece small bits of the battle together, but is not good." He was shocked by the level of fear in many of the survivors' eyes and scowled in anger at what he had been told. "I assume you have many others trying to piece together more at this moment?" the daimyo responded. In an attempt to make his point as clearly as possible, the negotiator stated, "Indeed I do, but it will take some time before we have an accurate report, my lord. In the meantime, I believe it would be unwise to initiate a retaliatory strike at this time." The Water Lord raised his eyebrows in agreement and then said, "I agree with you wholeheartedly. We are in no position to try to take the land of Spring, and at least not at the moment. Without the dreadnought we will have to consider taking Spring the hard way, and we will need more ships than we can possibly spare at the moment." The negotiator saw his old friend the Water Lord's curious expression and said, "I understand what you mean, my lord. If we tried to take it again anytime soon we risk retaliation from the other nations, but we may have another problem as well. One of the reports I received and a survivor I personally was able to interview revealed a troubling problem." He questioned, "And what would this problem be?" Knowing that this could not be disregarded, the negotiator did his best to understand what he would say and finally chose to state it bluntly. "It would appear that Lady Morgan the Snow Mariner Lord has not only survived the purge but has also found a new member who was responsible for the Admiral demise as well as every single Templar on board his ship. Do we know who this person is?" the Water Lord asked, rising to his full height and descending the stairs with a worried expression on his face. "Not yet, but we will in time, my friend. We do know his moniker. He calls himself Black Fox, and oddly enough he seemed to know the Admiral and killed him without a problem, and he took the Phoenix Blade as a price. We should know more by tomorrow," the negotiator replied. "This greatly complicates things. The admirals informed me even before you left that if this endeavor failed it could take almost a year and a half before we have the necessary military force not only to defend ourselves but to strike a secondary blow. And now you tell me our greatest threat is still alive," the Water Lord said, acknowledging that the situation had gotten so bad that they had to act. The negotiator gave a head nod. "I believe so, my lord, and I have rumors of at least 2 more. That means we could have at least 4 of these people to contend with, as they will be an unknown. However, these 2 are simply rumors, but they're better than nothing." "Very well, dispatch our agents to go and deal with these so-called rumors, and make sure nothing can be traced back to us," the Water Lord responded. "I will make the preparations immediately, and within a week's time we should be able to send the first strike team and infiltration unit to the more sensitive target." He questioned the negotiator, "And the second possible target?" "The second possible target will be handled during Operation Moon, my lord, and with that we will have an even greater asset in its riches, and if we lose it, it will not affect our plans greatly. Lord Sage of the First Civilization. Stronghold of the Hidden Resistance, the Land of Water's capital." The last words spoken by the Water Lord and the cunning negotiator were missed by the resistance members because they had to close the seals to prevent detection. This infuriated them, as they wondered what secrets would be revealed. "Did we listen too long? Have we been detected?" they asked. One of the SEAL experts, who had previously studied under an Uzumaki, said, "Negative sir, we shut the SEALs off just.in time but we missed the last bit of their conversation." In all honesty, the information itself had proven to be quite useful, but the resistance leader could only sigh that they had escaped detection due to this near miss. "It looks like we'll have to keep an ear to the ground if we want to learn more about this invasion, but I am more concerned about this Operation Moon and what it means," said one of the other resistance members, who was in shock over the news that the Land of Spring had prevented a full-scale invasion, even though it had not been on a massive scale. As he considered the situation, the resistance leader could only nod his head in agreement and say, "I agree, but at the moment we need to warn May in the Land of Spring about what's going to happen. What about the fact that the Mariner Lords are still alive and that the capital is now going to start hunting them down again? What should we do?" asked one of them. Knowing that they were comparatively safe and that the real danger was in the Neo-Caribbean itself, the resistance leader said, "We send that to May as well. Remember, she has 2 living Mariner Lords with her right now, and if anyone can find them, it's them. Besides, our military leader is in far more danger than we are. She's going to need all the help she can get." Gun deck, Land of Spring, Black Vixen. On the deck of the Vixen, Naruto stood looking out over the water with a look of pure rage. He was staring at the fire vessel, which was only 400 feet away from his own ship, but the ninja and fire troops were avoiding him, perhaps out of fear. His presence on the deck actually caused some of the ship's employees to recoil as they got a good look at him. The only other person who seemed to have this effect on them was Raven himself, who had joined his nephew. Karen and Haku could almost swear they heard him growling at times, and it was evident that his presence on deck kept Land of Fire at bay because the shinobi had made multiple attempts to approach his vessel but had stopped the moment they saw him on deck or the dock. Additionally, Jiraiya stood on a ship's deck and flinched as the 2 assassins stared at him as though they wanted to cut him to pieces. The old pervert was obviously resentful of the 2 assassins and the killer instinct because it was evident to everyone. However, at this precise moment, one of the crew members approached them and delivered some crucial news: Captain Lord Raven. Despite their animosity toward the fire vessel, the 2 of them turned to face him with a look of obvious curiosity. "We will be most grateful for any distraction you undoubtedly bring us, which should have some good news, correct?" they asked. The young man in question gave a positive nod and said, "I believe so, sir. The delegates from the Land of Wind wish to speak with you both." He had a lot of respect for them both. As he turned to face his uncle, Naruto could only smile behind his mask and remarked, "It would appear fortunate smiled on us this day, uncle. We may just get a new ally out of this." Knowing full well that they would take advantage of any chance to try to infiltrate the ship while they were gone, Raven said, "Indeed, but I would advise caution considering our unwanted shadow. Have your meeting, sir, and we will make sure none of them get too close to the ship. Without killing them, of course," said a number of crew members who had just arrived on deck with what appeared to be high-yield and extremely accurate sniper rifles, ready for action. Raven couldn't help but laugh. "Fascinating. If they get a little too close and pushy, remind them that this ship is ours, and if they do not respect our sovereignty, you have the right to take a leg off in the process to defend that sovereignty and our property." The 2 assassins then disembarked from the Vixen and walked more than 100 feet to the Land of Wind vessel. The snipers all nodded and started moving in the direction of the crow's nest as the gun crews swiftly joined in loading the main deck guns and aiming them at the fire vessel, capturing the attention of everyone on that ship. Land of Spring, gun deck of the Phoenix. Looking out at the Black Vixen, the Phoenix's captain wondered what this dangerous vessel was capable of and was still shocked that the ninja had attempted to board the ship multiple times, leveling the larger ship's guns directly at his ship. The Vixen was slightly bigger in some places but had more armor than his ship, which was only a heavy cruiser, and this battlecruiser was a new design to him. Then he saw Lord Raven and the captain leaving the ship, and once more, almost every weapon and sniper was aimed directly at him and his ship, making it obvious that if the ninja followed them or tried to board the Vixen, they would be shot at without a second's hesitation. He immediately signaled one of his officers to watch their VIPs. But at that moment, one of the radio operators came out and gave his captain a piece of paper. Jiraiya was immediately alarmed because he had already noticed the captain's worried expression, which made whatever was happening now undoubtedly concerning. The captain glanced up from the paper as the elderly pervert came over and gave it to him. The old pervert was taken aback by what he saw and realized that they were leaving shortly. Until he saw the expression on the captain's face, the old pervert said, It says here that they only want Team 7 and Rock Lee to act as an escort team for a high-profile client. We can hire a ship to send them back as soon as possible, and we can remain here to keep an eye on them. There were numerous sounds of the ship's crew getting ready to sail the Phoenix. The order said I'm to take them back, and my ship is a lot faster than anything we could charter at a moment's notice. Jiraiya was incredulous when the captain said, "We can't just give up this kind of an opportunity, Captain." An opportunity my ass. Take a real good look at the Black Vixen and you tell me what kind of a chance we have, honestly," said the captain, who was in no mood to argue and made his presence known. While many of the other ninja, including Jiraiya and his granddaughter, were taken aback by the conversation, they were also taken aback when the renowned pervert failed to provide a compelling counter-argument. The captain, however, chose to emphasize the point. He addressed the elderly pervert, but he could still tell that his argument was not being understood. "I have no intention of taking on a ship that single-handedly broke a super dreadnoughts in two. My vessel is a heavy cruiser. That thing over there is a fast attack battlecruiser with enough firepower to turn my ship into scrap metal. Then we can just leave some teams behind too." The captain tried to make his point as clear as possible when he said, "Are you insane, Jiraiya? If I leave you or any of your men behind, it will be in an international incident, which by the way I have orders to prevent at all costs while trying to bring this kid back in." The captain then decided to remind them of their main goals and instructions as well as their terms of interaction. "Do not forget that right now there are many things happening, and if you attempt to do your own thing you will put a lot of people in danger and create a very volatile situation with a country which I might add is technologically superior to us at this moment in time. Plus our orders are to bring in Naruto Uzumaki, not creating international incidents with a former ally. If anything, our superiors need to be apprised of the situation, and I have special operational command authority by both your Hokage and Fire Lord himself, so do not test me." He turned and started to speak for everyone to hear. "Make sure all crew and passengers are accounted for and get the ship sailing back home now." The Phoenix's crew was shocked that their captain could be so assertive, but they knew he was capable of much. As the Leaf Ninja realized that things were going to get more complicated, every crew member reacted right away and started working to get the ship ready for sailing. The Sand Scorpion's gun deck, Land of Spring. When Naruto and his uncle heard the sounds of a ship leaving port, they were taken aback to see the Phoenix heading out to sea. The two assassins exchanged glances, realizing that leaving was one of their main issues and that something was happening that they would have to deal with later. Even the Sand Scorpion's crew was taken aback by their Fire Country counterparts' early departure, and one of them gestured for them to follow him into the captain's private cabin. Gaara himself and his siblings were seated behind a desk. Naruto instantly removed his mask and hood to show his face to everyone and approached his longtime friend with a smile on his face. The brash blonde assassin said, "You look good, Gaara, so how have things been for you?" Gaara couldn't help but smile as well, saying, "I have been well, however this current situation with you leaves much to be desired." The meeting had at least not changed anything about his friend. "Indeed, it is only logical that you would be concerned about your own village and the repercussions. I assume you are aware that there is more going on than you can possibly understand," Raven responded. The one-tailed host simply raised his eyebrows. "Indeed, Naruto, you did not explain much in your letter, only that things seem to be moving in the favor of a particular group. Perhaps since we are in person you would care to explain." To Naruto's surprise, his uncle merely nodded in agreement as he started to explain. "As I said in the letter, I began to relive my ancestors' memories. My particular ancestors were a powerful group of warriors called the Assassin's Brotherhood." Naruto turned to Raven for advice and to ask if it was safe to bring his friend into this battle. "So what's so special about these assassins and their brotherhood?" Tonari asked, genuinely taken aback. Naruto raised his eyebrows and said, "I'll give you an abridged version of what's going on. Basically, back in the year 1191 AD, one of my ancestors known as Altair was involved in stopping the Templar Knights from obtaining what was known as the Apple of Eden, which granted them the ability to control all of mankind. And while he prevented the apple calling their hands, he could not stop the war from continuing long after his death." Everyone in the room was paying close attention as he went on. Then another ancestor named Ezio Auditore da Firenze was brought into the war that he did not ask to be part of and made a great deal of change, but also learned that if the Templars were allowed to continue, the world suffer, and that time was their enemy. He was the first to learn about the event that changed our world of Templars still wished to enslave humanity. Raven's next words, Fortunately for all of us, the first event was stopped, but some years later the secondary event, while not as strong, did occur and reset our planet in great ways that we are still dealing with effects even today, shocked the Sand Ninja. Everyone continues to listen, knowing that there is a lot to learn. Even the last 100 years have not been free from Templar influence and interference. The Second Great Ninja War almost broke out earlier if it had not been for the actions of the Assassin Brotherhood in the secondary group of Templars known as Knights to stop a corrupt group of assassins and the old Templar Guard that still exists to this day, which is more commonly known as the Reds. When Gara learned that there were good Templars, she was taken aback and asked, "What happened to these Knights?" "The Red Templars have been hunting them down and eliminating them along with our order. Their ultimate goal at this time is our and the Knights' genocide to prevent them from taking over this world. They're also responsible for helping the Akatsuki, and attaining their goal would be to capture of all of the Jinchuriki. For what purpose we still do not know, but it cannot be good," Naruto stated to them. "Can anything be done to stop them?" Temari asked, realizing that they were in grave danger as she glanced from Naruto to her brother. "The only thing we can do is kill them and try to fix the damage they have inflicted upon others, but it's never that easy," said Naruto. They were asked, "Why not?" "Because the Red Templars are notorious for always having a great deal of power at their disposal, and they have never been easy to kill. Even for us, it takes time to make sure that the person we are targeting is truly a Red Templar and not innocent bystander, my dear," Raven replied to her. "For those very reasons most of the villages can't do anything to them unless they've been exposed, and even then they have so much power they can do things to circumvent the law itself. Because we work in the shadows and have no direct allegiance to any country or village, we are free to operate for the good of all mankind, but it doesn't always make it easy, and we have to be careful not to kill an innocent," Naruto continued. Gara and his sensei Baki came to the realization that the Brotherhood was similar to the Anbu of ninjas, but without the limitations that came with being a part of a village. In fact, they had already noticed Red Templars, though so far only in other nations. "Man, you and my brother have the worst luck, I swear, and yet at the same time you're also the most dangerous people I know," Kankuro said, struggling to find the right words. As Naruto turned to face the puppet master, he said, "Thanks, I think." Temari was still trying to process everything she had discovered that day, but the most recent event in the Land of Spring left her perplexed. But why were they so interested in the Land of Spring and waves? It makes no sense to me, she asked herself. That is indeed a good question. While we are uncertain of their motives, we do know that whatever it is highly important and they are willing to kill for it. And logic says we must find out what it is first, before they do, Raven said, anticipating this question and providing the best response he could. "That's why you recommended us to set up a military and trading post in the Land of Waves?" Gara asked, sensing that this was where they were coming in. Naruto looked at his companion while responding, "That's part of it, but I also know that Wave is a huge trading port, and if anything they could help out your economy greatly since you are still in recovery after what the snake did." Knowing that their nation needed all the assistance it could get right now, everyone from the Land of Wind nodded their heads right away. Naruto then realized that they could receive even more assistance here, adding, "Plus setting up an alliance with the Land of Spring could also help you out a lot as well." "That's a good idea. We could set up a consulate here just like we did in the Hidden Leaf," Kankuro replied. "You have a consulate in the Hidden Leaf?" the two assassins asked after exchanging glances before turning back to their allies. With the words, "Yes, we still have our consulate, but there's been some debate whether or not it would be a good idea to keep it at this time," Temari was the first to see right away that something might come of this. Raven tried to emphasize his point by saying to her, "It would indeed be a good idea to keep it, my dear. Keeping a close eye on the elders and the councils might prove useful not just to us but you as well," she said honestly, trying to find an excuse not to spy on Hidden Leaf but also wanting to return. "You want us to spy on Hidden Leaf for you? That sounds a little dangerous if you ask me. We still have some allies in the village, however we have no way to contact them. Plus it would be a good idea for you to keep an eye on suspected Templars and see what they're up to, and since you have diplomatic immunity they can't do anything to you without getting the village military force suspicion upon them," Naruto replied. The three siblings and their sensei glanced at one another right away and acknowledged their point, but a new dilemma emerged. Whom should they trust? "That's all well and good, but who do we ask for help without advertising to these Templars? That appears to be the biggest problem we got right now," replied Kankuro. "Fortunately we have two contacts in the village that we know can be trusted," And in all likelihood they have others they can contact as well, Naruto said, beaming broadly at them. Gaara questioned, and they would be my old friend? Remember the crazy snake lady from the exam? She's an assassin in training and her boyfriend just happens to be my old sensei from the academy and the only remaining full-fledged Templar Knight in the village at this time. The four sand ninjas nodded their heads in agreement, realizing that a lot was going on in their world and that they would soon play a significant part in it. The only thing left to wonder was what would happen in the interim, since it was obvious that these Red Templars would not sit around doing nothing. Kishimoto Kappa Copyright. The Land of Spring. It was evident since the purge that a lot had happened to both Morgan and May in a variety of ways that had impacted not only their own survival but also the survival of those under their command. The fresh air was crisp and inviting, including the aroma of coffee and tea being served that day at the Kappa Copyright where they were currently sitting enjoying each other's company without the threat of being destroyed by some water country zealot. I've been dying for a good cup of coffee for so long, May, and to have it here my homeland with a little less snow is very enjoyable, Morgan said, relishing the rush of what many referred to as the real black gold rather than the obnoxious oil she needed to lubricate her ship. This Kappa Copyright had some of the best tea she had ever tasted, and May herself could now see why her friend had been so desperate during the war and return home. It was a lovely place without the snow. The resistance leaders noted the satisfied expression on the Mariner Lord's face and remarked, I understand what you mean, Morgan, and I do have to agree that the new name for your homeland seems to fit like a glove, yet all around your homeland and the smaller islands it is still a winter wonderland. Yes, it is. I just wish everyone was here to see it, Morgan replied. May hoped for a positive response this time and asked, do you know if anyone else made it besides you that this? Not many of us, I'm afraid to say. Rouge was lucky that not many people on her ship were killed, but it needed massive repairs and she headed home as fast as possible. I don't know what happened to Jack per se, but I do know that Rouge does know, and the last time we talked he was fine, just not the man we remember. Morgan continued. May asked, and the others, how are they? In hiding at the moment, but we can get a hold of them easily if it's needed, and right now it's looking like that need could be coming real soon, Morgan stated. She recalled the past and the suffering it would cause, saying, I know what you mean, I lost so many good men and women to that son of a bitch. Good friends just so he could make that son of a bitch of a daimyo happy. Morgan smiled and said, he's dead now, Black Fox saw to that. He killed that bastard, how? Was May's question now that she knew this information. She paused to take a sip of coffee before continuing, saying, well, you saw part of the battle from shore, but I was there in the thick of it and he saved my ass when I took on the admiral, who I might add was still better in swordsmanship than me, and then it becomes like an angel of mercy to me but an angel of death to him. And then they fought the whole time he was just calling the admiral captain like an insult. Then the admiral got a good look at his face and I swore I could see fear there on this man who had put the fear god into us. They fought for a few more seconds and eventually he just killed him, then did that thing with the sword on the entire ship. Morgan continued. After a few moments of silence, May said, okay, remind me not to piss him off. They both couldn't help but laugh, but their moment of joy was cut short when smoke appeared to the left of the table and what appeared to be a rather large gecko with a package on its back. May knew right away that something had gone wrong when she sent this summoner animal. Lady May, this package is to be delivered to you as soon as possible and please forgive my tardiness, but it was difficult to locate you, the gecko said, leaping to its feet and saluting her before removing the package from its back and handing it to her. May accepted the package as though nothing was amiss, but she was aware that the message had been delivered to her. The contents were clearly significant enough to warrant this level of publicity, but at least it appeared to be a routine mail delivery. The gecko saluted her once more before vanishing in a cloud of smoke, leaving the two women stunned and aware that a significant event was about to occur. Thank you for the delivery, and I hope for more in the future. But the two of them are just enjoying their lunch and are already planning to go to the war room as soon as possible. Residents of the daimyo and military headquarters, Land of Spring, War Room. The war room was once again bustling with activity as all of the information that had been brought from the water resistance was displayed in front of them. The Spring Lord, the two master assassins, and the Mariner Lord of their lands, Morgan, entered the room with worried expressions as the large doors opened. The first person to reach the table was Koyuki, who said, "Report, gentlemen," in front of everyone. The admiral turned to her and said, It would appear, my lady, that our country is an even bigger prize than we first anticipated. From what has been gathered, at great risk to the water capital resistance movement indicates that they will once again attempt to invade our country. However, it appears we have at most a year and a half before they have the military strength to try again, my lady. One of the younger generals in the room, who had fought in the resistance prior to the liberation of the Land of Spring, was taken aback by this. He knew that the next battle would be much more dangerous, diverse, and multi-front, making a final battle seem like a backyard brawl. Even with a year, we may not be able to prepare the adequate forces and supplies to repel an even more auspicious invasion. And even with the aid of the airships, there's no guarantee we can defend our borders indefinitely. And to make matters worse, there are two primary routes to capital, the young general replied. This route here, my lady, is the same one you used to take back your throne, but it also presents a secondary opportunity to invade our country and is a second front, but more defensible one, since it is a strong bottleneck at this point here. It will take time to properly outfit this area, which we may not have to, since they were far larger territory than we'll, and will undoubtedly have access to more resources, said one of the few female admirals, nodding her head as she pointed to a three-dimensional map of their nation, pointing to the route that the daimyo and her ninja bodyguards had taken. Naruto, what are your thoughts on this particular problem? Koyuki asked, remembering who was standing next to her and his extraordinary ability to do the impossible, even though she had only had time to skim the essentials of what she was reading. She realized that they would still be overrun unless some sort of miracle happened. As Naruto read the information on the map, he realized that neither side could formally take any aggressive action at this time because all the other nations would be closely monitoring this area. Therefore, something had to be done without causing any issues with the other territories. Then, as he read a specific document that stated that the Land of Water needed to be able to rebuild its forces without any issues, he thought of one of his more recent ancestors' memories that came flooding back, and their attitudes toward those who attempted to take what was not theirs. He then turned to face Morgan. As he continued to read the documents creating his plan, the room had grown rather noisy and raucous as everyone tried to come up with solutions or was just arguing with one another. I think the Whirlpool Lord has something to say, Morgan said, clearing her throat loudly enough to grab everyone's attention when she realized he had devised a plan. He nodded to her and then looked the paper in his hands. They need to be uninterrupted for a year and a half to pull this off, and any kind of distraction will hamper them greatly. This document here also says that they have expanded too far and some of their territories are being held on to by a very thin margin, if not a hair. So what I propose is rather simple. We authorize privateers, which is basically legal piracy, to go out, and said there should be both the military side and their civilian side, since it is controlled by the government now. Privately owned vessels going out and attacking their supply lines, that would definitely disrupt commerce and their ability to make war on us. And if we play it just right, we could have complete deniability as a cover story saying that we were unwilling to take action and then you two had gone all renegade, is the summary that all of the admirals and generals understand to be both brilliant and completely insane. The admirals decided to say, this plan has some potential, but we have one problem. There is only your two ships at the moment that will not be enough to create a significant enough disruption to their ability to make war. As the military leaders started discussing the plan's benefits but also voicing their concerns, Mei and Naruto turned to Morgan this time and said, I might be able to help with that, but it will take a little bit of time to get them together. One of the generals questioned, what do you mean, Lady Morgan? I know what the Lightning Lord is, and she in turn knows where the remainder of the Mariner Lords are, and the three remaining elite captains, or as some call them badass, are currently located. And with the assistance of Lord Uzumaki, that would bring up our total to 7 ships, which can cover a lot more ground of the Great Neo-Caribbean, she continued. Raven raised his eyebrows and then said, and you'll have the aid of what is left of Whirlpool to assist you. In fact, it would be wise for your vessel, Lady Morgan, to return with us to undergo some refits once your vessel is seaworthy enough. Is the ship stable enough? Koyuki asked the man in charge of the dry docks. Yes, ma'am, it is stable enough now, and we've even reinforced the ship's hull plating with new equipment and materials that should reinforce her to take much more punishment than before, and we've managed to restore her engines completely as well. We just need one more day for final checks and she's 100% again. The man replied to his superior. After being genuinely impressed, Morgan made the decision to question Raven directly, asking, what exactly do you intend to do my ship? I believe the shields would be an adequate add-on, as well as some new weapons for your vessel, plus the Vixen is in need of her final upgrades, Raven replied. Everyone nodded, but one general asked, "What do you think this is?" as he studied a report that mentioned something related to Operation Moon. "We must inform all of our intelligence groups to keep their eyes and ears open for this," Raven said after being the first to pick up the document and read it, realizing that a new operation involving the Templars was underway. As they started reading the documents, everyone in the room nodded, understanding that a lot was about to happen. The edge of the Land of Fire 3 days later. As he led a small boy toward a carriage, Kakashi Hitaki and his team of one calmly approached their client, who was rather large but had a kind disposition about him. "Don't worry son, we'll see your mother soon enough and I'll try to convince her to return with us," he said. The young boy said, "You know won't be that easy dad." The bigger man said, "I have to try now don't I?" Then he saw his son looking curiously behind him. When he turned to greet the ninja, the larger man smiled and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I am the crowned prince of the Crescent Moon Kingdom Michiru, and this is my son Hikaru." 4 days later, in the Land of Lightning, off the coast of New Orleans. As the two powerful ships approached the docks, Naruto walked the length of the ship up to about and took his first look at New Orleans. The Black Vixen and the Frozen Queen were moving quickly through the icy, dark waters of the night while the rain was still falling on the Land of Lightning. As the wreckers were inspecting the deck where the new weapons were placed and the long-range mortars at the front of the battle, where Naruto was now standing, the group leader approached him and said, "The new toys are in perfect working order, and I'm impressed the ship did so well in combat, especially against that bloody dreadnought." "You're telling me, ever been here before?" asked Naruto, grinning. "Oh yes, we've been here before nephew. Back then these three were just young pups and couldn't help but enjoy the festival." As one of the wreckers put it, "That was a long time ago and you know what Silver?" Silver took out his pipe and stared at the city, only to realize that it was raining heavily. "Oh come on Labs, I didn't say you didn't enjoy it was just very hard getting them back on the ship is all." As a parent on the dock, Silver observed the crew's smiles and remarked, "It never fails you want to have a good smoke and the rain comes down, it's just like get in the shower and there's someone at the door." As Morgan started to get off the ship, Naruto nodded to her and turned back to his uncle, saying, "Uncle, keep an eye on ships and an eye out for trouble, I got that feeling. I swear your mother must have inherited all that bad and good luck from her parents, especially that feeling if you get my drift." He started to exit the ship with Karen and Hiku at his side, without saying, "Duly noted, just be careful, keep an eye out for Reds." As they emerged from the documents, the three of them met up with Morgan and one of her crew members. The group followed Morgan because she knew where she was going and he realized how likely this festival was. The group then arrived at a sizable nightclub known as Voodoo Alley. The bouncer was going to attempt to bar them from entering, but he was about to do so when he saw who they were. After giving Morgan a quick glance, he parted the doors like the Red Sea, allowing them to enter the establishment. The song, "Voodoo Child," was playing in the background, and everyone was dancing to its distinctive beat. When a man noticed them, he motioned for them to follow him up a flight of stairs to a spacious balcony area with the words, "Reserved for owner," written on it. When they reached the top, one of the men tried to take their weapons by force, but the Black Fox, who was now staring the man in the eyes, touched his throat with a wrist blade and even drew some blood. The bodyguard in question instantly retreated, truly terrified that he saw a cold-blooded killer, especially one with restraint, which is uncommon even among ninjas these days. But Morgan walked through the crowd and gave the man a dismal nod, saying, "Trust me, you don't want to piss him off, it's been a long time Rouge." A woman's silhouette was seen sitting in a shadowed corner. She then rose, revealing a woman who was more attractive and healthy than most people could ever imagine. She wore a simple top hat with unusual items scattered about and white face paint that resembled a skull. Overall, it was evident that she was not his youngest Morgan, but time had been kind to her. She approached and gazed at both Morgan and Naruto before saying, "I see the news of your homeland being free once more has brought you out of hiding, my little snow princess. And to finally meet the Maelstrom Mariner and an Uzumaki to boot is quite an honor too. I am Lady Rouge of the Land of Lightning, and if you two have come to see me, it must mean we are needed once more." The Land of Lightning, New Orleans, and the Voodoo Alley. Then, at the request of Lady Rouge, who had a rather inquisitive expression on her face and was wondering why they were here given that she had only heard rumors, Naruto and Morgan sat down. To be honest, her curiosity was piqued by what she was thinking about. Rouge was the first to speak when she settled down. So perhaps you can tell me if the rumors I have been hearing about are indeed true, Morgan, like about your homeland being recently invaded and that you all somehow managed to destroy a dreadnought. And what of this young man sitting beside you? What is his story, I wonder? A larger man with slicked back braided hair appeared in the shadows. Based on the appearance of his hair, it appeared that he was one of the 5 great cages of the hidden villages. The older ninja was shocked when the black fox took off his hood to reveal his face, and he was unable to control his shock. You're related to the 4th Hokage, aren't you, boy? He asked. It does not matter who I am related to, okay, and besides I have some issues with that man and would like them to be dropped if you do not mind, Naruto said, turning to face the older man, whose eyes were narrowed significantly. Although the cage of the hidden cloud, and a few of his ninja in the room were taken aback by the young man's tone, they eventually realized that it was a delicate subject and that his mother's side of the family could also be sensitive. Nevertheless, it couldn't help but feel that something was seriously amiss and that this young man would soon play a significant role in their lives. New Orleans, the land of lightning, outside the Voodoo Alley. The man from Red Command who was given this specific task had a weird feeling that he was going to pay for all of his previous transgressions. Soon after, all of his operatives were among the best in both assassination and infiltration, which he still thought was funny because they weren't a part of the vile order that had previously caused him a lot of trouble. He turned to one of his men and said, "We have to avoid attracting any unwanted attention and we have to infiltrate this structure as soon as possible," in a very soft but firm tone that only he could hear, even though he could feel the sense of dread growing stronger as he gazed at the Voodoo Alley. After indicating a narrow alley with a nod, the man said, "I already have several octaves in the back. Security notice a quiet way in and out, my lord." "Good, I want this done by the book if possible, but no matter what, this pirate lord must die, is that understood?" As you signaled for them to follow him and his operative into the alley to accomplish their goal at all costs, everyone nodded their heads in rapid succession. The land of lightning, New Orleans, and the Voodoo Alley. However, Rouge could only hope that the land of water would not be stupid enough to try something here. Lady Rouge and the other people sitting in her private area were shocked by what they had been told and realized that things were going to get much worse than she had initially thought. After observing Morgan and the young man, she realized what they wanted, which both excited and horrified her. She started to consider her options, realizing that there might not be any because she needed more information before she could make a wise decision. "Everything you have told me is quite disturbing in all honesty, and yet the decision to join you is not an easy one to make either," she responded. After that, Morgan stood up and approached her friend, who was looking directly into her eyes. Morgan said, "You know better than anyone what they will do if given half a chance, and you also know they'll be sending Reds here, and you know that they cannot be traced back to them to avoid an international incident." Rouge exhaled. She was certain that it had to do with this little piece of information regarding the operation, even though she was unaware that she was holding and knew her friend was correct. "You said something about the last communication mentioned something about Operation Moon, did you not?" According to Morgan, yes, they said there was a potential target there and that they would confirm when they launched the operation. Naruto and Morgan exchanged glances before turning back to her. The first to realize this was Naruto, who said, "You know something, or you at least have a theory that happens to fit the facts." Lady Rouge nodded her head before saying, "I think I do actually. At this present time, the crown princes of the land of the Crescent Moon, a father and son, are currently touring the mainland before they return to their homeland, and if anything were to happen to the king, they would be the only heirs to the throne." When Morgan realized they had their first real lead, he became even more intrigued. "What is so special about the Crescent Moon Kingdom?" he asked. "They are the premier tourist destination in the Neo-Caribbean, and they are also sitting in an area known as the Water's Neutral Zone. So they sit just outside the conflict zone of the Land of Water and its disputed territories, and they have a rather healthy economy like no other in the territory." Rouge told them this. Naruto felt that he could do something to stop their plans from happening, and the two of them looked at each other, realizing that this was exactly what the Land of Water needed. She smiled and gave him a positive response when he asked, "I take it the princes are about to return home pretty soon?" She told him, "That's right, but if my source is right, there is one complication and you will not like it at all, Mr. Uzumaki." She also saw him stiffen slightly. "The hidden leaf is involved, aren't they?" he inquired. Rouge simply nodded her head and followed with, "That's right, and their transport is sent to leave in 1 week's time from a neutral country just outside of our borders. No matter what, I would recommend you follow them or appoint yourself an extra set of protection, as they are going to need it in all honesty, and the other fact that fits is that he's there." Morgan asked, "Jack's there?" and instantly recognized the person she was referring to. "Jack?" asked Naruto, wondering who this Jack was. Morgan started by saying, Jack was once a high-level captain in the Water Navy and married a beautiful woman who was an Anbu in the Hidden Mist. You could say it was love at first sight, and they were dangerous together. Morgan went on, eventually they had a daughter who tried her best to follow in both their footsteps, but then all the trouble with the purge started, and eventually it was discovered that his wife and daughter had a rather strong bloodline and they came for them. Naruto was genuinely impressed by what he had heard thus far. Rouge continued the story by saying, they honestly expected him to kill his own family, but instead were the ones who were executed that day. His whole crew as well as 2 other ships went rogue because of this, and they witnessed some terrible atrocities. Morgan then took the drink that had been handed to her. "Do you think you will help us?" asked Naruto, who was genuinely impressed by what he had heard thus far. "I cannot say for certain, but from what I have seen so far, if there is anyone who can bring his fighting spirit back, I believe that it will be you, Mr. Uzumaki," Rouge responded. Naruto understood her words, but what really made everyone uneasy was when one of her staff members showed up with Haku and Karen. "My lady, several men who are obviously armed to the teeth have just entered the alley, including that they are here on official business and even had warrants for several people's arrest, including your own," she said. As soon as he got up, Naruto used his enhanced senses, just like his ancestor Arno had done long ago, to realize that, we can't keep this disguise up for very long. He triggered his Eagle Vision, also known as Eagle Pulse, which allowed him to see everything in the club and quickly locate the phony police officers. Unaware that an assassin was already there, the leaders said, "It will serve its purpose once these pirates are dead, and if the current cage dies as well, it'll just be a bonus which we can blame on them and put in our own person to rule the Hidden Cloud Village." Immediately standing up again, Naruto turned to face them and said, "They're Templars, probably Reds, and I hate to say this, but you are now officially a target as well, Cage. Out of curiosity, you're not planning to destroy my club, are you?" Rouge asked, clearly curious about what was going to happen. "I'm not a murderer, I just assassinate people who try to harm others. These guys are just at the top of my list. Feel like helping Morgan?" she replied. "Always," she grinned, "but I think fighting in the club would be too dangerous." As Morgan and Rouge joined him and his friends in getting ready to greet their unexpected guests in a way that was appropriate for them, Naruto nodded his head in agreement. The club's layout allowed the 5 of them to be swiftly concealed. By this point, the imposters had entered the private booth expecting to see their target, but were met with the irate face of the Hidden Cloud's Cage, who was obviously not amused. Haku and Karen had prepared for the fight, which seemed inevitable at this point. I would be laughing uncontrollably right now if the situation weren't so serious, but he took the young assassin's warnings seriously. The leader of their group, who could be described as either extremely brave or perhaps extremely foolish, chose to intimidate this intimidating figure. "Lord Cage, it would be most advisable if you hand over the pirate lord known as Lady Rouge to us at this very moment in time, and you will not be implicated as a potential collaborator against both this nation and the Land of Water," said the group's leader, advancing in the most intimidating manner imaginable as he attempted to intimidate this giant of a man, knowing that he had a job and a specific female pirate to kill. In an attempt to intimidate them and keep them from realizing the danger directly above them, the large Cage then stood to his full height, revealing his enormous size to them. He then walked forward slightly, now standing directly in front of them in all his glory. The lead member of the Reds saw the signs of distress and, before he could defuse the situation further, he was shocked to see several other people falling from the overhead ironworks onto his fellow Reds. The Reds felt, for want of a better word, like a tiny ant compared to this man, but they were allowing their fear and other emotions to control their actions at this moment. Assassins seemed to this Red like an old tale of the Templars' boogeyman coming true. Knowing that he had to alert his superiors that their oldest and presumed extinct enemy had unexpectedly returned from the grave, Naruto let his emotions and instincts take over and used his fight or flight reflex to swiftly leave the area. He started to pursue the Templar, aware that he might be led to others. The remaining Red operative ran as fast as his legs would allow him to, fearing what he might see if he turned around. He was so preoccupied with just running that he missed an obstacle and struck the ground hard, only to look up to see that the assassin had taken to the roofs. A part of him was enthralled with what he saw as this deadly wraith moved among the tops of the buildings with such elegance and grace, knowing exactly where he was going and who he was targeting. Unfortunately, he was that target right now. Knowing that he could die if he waited any longer in this spot, the Red did not stay motionless for long. His blood and adrenaline were rushing through his body, providing him with the energy he needed to move forward, knowing that every second he was ahead was crucial. Even so, he made an effort to maintain his mental acuity because he knew that he needed to lose his pursuer, but the likelihood of that happening now was negligible, and he was only motivated to live because he dared not look back, because doing so would be tantamount to inviting his own death, which he desperately wanted to avoid. His natural speed was already faster than most people, including some ninjas, but it might not have been sufficient for the raptor, who had him in its sights and was refusing to let him go without a fight. After this strange confusion and desperate need for assistance, he saw it as though it were finally coming into focus in his vision, which was obviously his destination and his hope for salvation. The ship's captain, a high-ranking Templar and a proud member of the Reds, was largely taken aback to see one of his subordinates sprinting toward him and his ship as though he were the devil on his heels. The captain had a dark past associated with a particular incident. When the Red agent was getting close to the ship and his rescue, he yelled at the top of his lungs, "Assassins!" which made the ship's captain shudder. This feeling of both fear and optimism was soon replaced by a sense of shock and dread, as well as a creeping fear as he watched a figure dressed entirely in black land on the operative, forcing him to become motionless. The captain's eyes first widened in shock and disbelief, but then his logical mind took over and he ordered his ship to immediately make for open sea as one of the other crew members motioned for the operative to get on board. When the black-robed figure first reached his full height and left the cadaver on the ground for everyone to see, he gave off a menacing aura and started to look around the ship he was headed for to see if there were any potential enemies or targets. His eyes were then drawn to the captain and then went wide in shock. In the distance, an eagle's cry announced the man's death. It took him nearly a second to control his emotions before he was reminded of that awful night so long ago, when one of his primary targets was on board. The ship's captain had never imagined that he would see another assassin, but there he was, peering into his soul as though condemning him for all his transgressions. The captain and his crew, however, saw a rather large black ship holding up the documents without even stopping as the assassin simply jumped aboard as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The captain watched in disbelief and wonder as the assassin took the helm, but they believed they were safe as they headed for the open ocean. The captain understood that fighting was his only chance to survive this encounter. His ship lacked the speed to outrun the Vixen, and he knew of only one place where he could use all of his guns in the hopes of putting an end to the monstrosity pursuing him and his crew. Even among the assassins, the only thing he had done for the Templars that could justify this kind of retaliation was turning his ship into what was known as the Deadly Circle. Nevertheless, the thought of that young woman and her child did not leave him, and he wondered if everything was returning to punish him for his transgressions and evil. A simple breeze blew back the hood, revealing the child's more mature face and the unfathomable rage on his face. The captain looked upon the bridge and saw the assassin and several of his targets standing there, halfway through his ship's turn, when they noticed the dark ship cruising parallel to them, not even trying to make the same turn, but instead bringing all of its guns to bear upon them. Only one gun was required to split his ship in two and damage the rock face of the cleft they were sailing alongside, and the assassin even made a motion with his hands as he raised his hood back into position, which the captain knew was a signal to fire the main battery. The captain knew they needed to issue a warning as soon as possible, not only to the other Templars but also to those like himself who had participated in that attack so long ago, so he quickly gathered a number of people and got them inside the main communication center to seek shelter from the barrage of rocks and weapons that were raining down on his ship and crew. He asked, "Do we still have communications?" turning to one of his crew. "The long-range system has been destroyed, sir, but the short-range should still be functional," the young man replied. In the end, it would show how this young man had turned out. "Turn it on. Uzumaki, you bloodsucker, you're going to have to come down here to do your own dirty work, assassin. Do you hear me? Do you?" The captain knew that there was only one way to save his career, and it might require giving his life to do it. Naruto had a hunch that this man would somehow survive like a cockroach, so he walked over to the main steering deck radio. From what he could see, their long Range communication was lost, but it only took one ship with empathy to spread the word to the other Templars and his personal targets. Taking up the receiver, he said, "I figured that wouldn't kill you. After all, you were the only one she didn't injure that night." Knowing that it would irritate the person, the captain could not resist saying, "That's right, I'm still alive, and I must say that for an assassin, you've managed to kill just about everyone else, but like a poor marksman keep missing the target." Without the other captain noticing, Naruto turned to face one of the gutters and commanded, "Bring all of the guns to bear upon the cliff face and await my command to fire." "Perhaps I no longer need to try, Captain," he said, returning to his conversation with the captain. The words, "Uzumaki, I know how to find the others and you want to kill me yourself. You're going to have to come down here," were unexpected by the captain, and a tiny bit of fear crept into his chest, clutching his heart. The words that followed were as cold as the ocean depths themselves as he gazed at the locket that had once belonged to his mother and could only feel this moment, which was rage. Everyone was watching him closely, wondering what he would do in this situation. "I've done far worse than kill you. I've hurt you. And I wish to go on hurting you. I shall leave you as you left me." The words, "as you left her," marooned for all eternity in a watery grave, buried alive, made the captain feel as though all hope had been lost. The captain could no longer hold in his rage, realizing that this was his end and nothing would stop it no matter how much he wished it would. "Uzumaki. Uzumaki. So how bad is it going to be? Convinced Jack come back, and when do we get started?" Naruto asked his fellow mariner Lord after turning off the radio and ordering the ship's weapons to fire.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.